The vast, treeless expanse of the Central Asian steppe in the 12th century CE was a world defined by its unforgiving environment. Survival was a constant struggle, dependent on the rhythms of the seasons and the health of one's herds. The landscape was dominated by scattered, fiercely independent nomadic tribes, whose primary political and social units were the clan and the tribe. Kinship and blood ties determined loyalty, and a person's status was measured by the strength of their horse and the size of their herds. The historical record, pieced together from sources like The Secret History of the Mongols, paints a picture of endemic tribal warfare, cattle raids, and shifting alliances born of necessity and ambition. Into this fractured world, around 1162, was born a child named Temujin. His early life was a microcosm of the steppe's brutal realities. After his father, Yesugei, was poisoned by a rival tribe, Temujin's family was abandoned by their clan. The young boy, his mother, and his siblings were left to fend for themselves in a hostile environment. Temujin's subsequent years were marked by betrayal and hardship, including a period of enslavement where he was forced to wear a wooden collar, or kang. These experiences, however, served not to break him, but to forge in him a steely resolve and a deep understanding of the vulnerabilities of the traditional tribal system. Temujin's ascent began with the slow and methodical gathering of followers, a process that transcended the old loyalties of kinship. He offered protection and a promise of a more stable, prosperous future. He distinguished himself not merely as a warrior, but as a strategic thinker and a leader of exceptional charisma. He was a master of building alliances, but he also demonstrated a ruthless pragmatism in dealing with betrayal, a trait that would become a hallmark of his reign. His growing influence was based on personal loyalty rather than inherited status, a revolutionary concept that challenged the very foundation of steppe society. This new structure allowed him to integrate disparate peoples and talented individuals into a single, cohesive unit. Temujin's early campaigns against the Tatars, Merkits, and other rival tribes were not just about conquest, they were about systematically dismantling the old order of a fragmented steppe. His goal was the unification of all the peoples of the felt-walled tents into a single, cohesive entity. By 1206, at a great assembly or kurultai, he had achieved this objective. He was proclaimed Genghis Khan, a title roughly translated as Oceanic Ruler or Universal Ruler. This event marked the end of the fractured tribal system and the beginning of a unified Mongol identity, creating the foundation for an empire whose reach and influence would soon become global. The Golden Horde, a future of immense wealth and power, was conceived in these early struggles for survival and dominion on the steppe. With his new title and authority, Genghis Khan embarked on a systematic campaign to forge a new pan-Mongol identity that transcended the traditional loyalties of clan and tribe. The foundation of this new identity was a disciplined military and a codified legal system. Genghis Khan's military innovations were key to his success. He completely restructured the Mongol army, replacing the old clan-based units with a new decimal system. The army was organized into units of 10 arban, 100 zun, 1,000 mingan, and 10,000 tumen. This structure ensured that soldiers from different tribes fought alongside each other, fostering a new sense of shared Mongol identity and loyalty to the great Khan himself. This military organization was not merely a tactical change. It was a profound social and political innovation. Just a quick announcement. If you enjoy this video so far, please subscribe to our channel, as it motivates us to bring you a new story every evening. This is the only kind request tonight, and we won't bother you with it anymore until the very end of today's story. Let's get back to the video. Beyond military structure, Genghis Khan instituted a strict legal code known as the Great Yasa, or Ik-Zasag. This was a set of laws and decrees that governed every aspect of Mongol life, from military conduct and hunting to property rights and legal disputes. The Yasa's principles were centered on discipline, meritocracy, and the absolute authority of the Khan. It mandated severe punishments for crimes like theft and murder, and it promoted religious tolerance, which was a pragmatic decision designed to integrate the diverse populations the Mongols would soon encounter. This legal framework provided a common set of rules and values that bound the newly unified Mongol peoples together, regardless of their tribal origins. Genghis Khan's campaigns during this period were not just about territorial expansion, they were about creating a unified Mongol state. His military campaigns against neighboring states, such as the Tangut Kingdom of Shisha and the Jin dynasty in northern China, served a dual purpose. They provided the nascent Mongol state with the wealth, resources, and administrative expertise it lacked, while also giving the newly unified Mongol army invaluable experience in large-scale siege warfare and open-field combat against settled civilizations. These campaigns honed the Mongol war machine into a highly efficient and adaptable force. By the time of his death in 1227, Genghis Khan had established an empire that stretched from the Caspian Sea to the Pacific Ocean. He had not only unified the Mongols, but had also created a political and military entity capable of sustained conquest on a scale unprecedented in human history. The campaigns, the legal reforms, and the military innovations of this period laid the foundation for the empires of his successors, including the Golden Horde. The groundwork was now laid for the Mongol war machine to expand westward, bringing with it the seeds of a new civilization that would transform the political, cultural, and social landscape of Eurasia. The genesis of the Golden Horde is inextricably linked to the complex and often controversial life of Jochi, the eldest son of Genghis Khan. Born shortly after his mother Burke was freed from captivity by the Merkits, Jochi's paternity was questioned by some, most notably by his brother Chagatai. This cloud of suspicion, though Genghis Khan always claimed Jochi as his own, would create a deep-seated political and personal rift among the brothers, a tension that would shape the future of the Mongol Empire's western territories. Despite this ambiguity, Jochi was a respected military commander, known for his prowess in the field and his diplomatic skills. His campaigns were instrumental in securing the conquest of the peoples of the forest and the nomadic tribes of the steppe, extending the Mongol realm to the west. Jochi's most significant military contributions came during the Mongol invasion of the Khwarezmian Empire from 1219 to 1221. He commanded a separate army and was tasked with the subjugation of the northern territories. His tactical approach, which favoured a strategy of encirclement and calculated siege warfare over a direct, destructive assault, often put him at odds with his father and brothers, who preferred a more ruthless and total form of annihilation. This difference in military philosophy, combined with his suspected lineage, intensified the rivalries within the Mongol leadership. The most notable dispute occurred during the siege of the city of Urgench, where a conflict over strategy between Jochi and Chagatai required the direct intervention of Genghis Khan, further exposing the fault lines within the family. In the final years of Genghis Khan's life, the Great Khan began to partition his immense empire among his sons, a tradition intended to maintain family unity and control. To Jochi, Genghis Khan designated the lands to the west, stretching from the Irtysh River to the territories as far as the hooves of Mongol horses had trod. This vast expanse, which was yet to be fully conquered, was to be Jochi's ulus, or tribal territory. This inheritance, which would later become the Golden Horde, was a testament to Jochi's military achievements and his status as the eldest son, regardless of the persistent whispers. However, Jochi would not live to see his designated lands conquered. He died in 1227 under mysterious circumstances, just 6 months before his father's own death. The official cause of death was illness, but rumors of poisoning by rivals were widespread and persisted for generations. His death left his inheritance to his sons, chief among them Batu Khan. It was Batu who would lead the great westward campaign that completed the conquest of the Rus principalities and brought the designated territories under Mongol control. Jochi's mysterious demise and the unresolved tensions among his brothers set the stage for the creation of a semi-independent state. His legacy was not merely the lands he inherited, but the political foundation he laid for a future empire that would, under his descendants, establish its own destiny, separate and distinct from the authority of the great Khan in the east. The Mongol advance into Eastern Europe began not as a full-scale invasion, but as a deep reconnaissance in force. Following the conquest of the Khwarezmian Empire, Genghis Khan dispatched 2 of his most accomplished generals, Subutai and Jebe, on a mission to pursue the fleeing Khwarezmian Shah. This pursuit took them across the Caucasus Mountains, where they defeated Georgian and Alan forces. Their objective then shifted to the steppes north of the Black Sea, the heartland of the Cuman-Kipchak Confederation, which had been a traditional Mongol rival. This initial engagement brought the Mongols into direct contact with the peoples who would eventually form the core of the Golden Horde's future subjects. The Cuman Khan, Kutan, desperate for assistance, appealed to the princes of the Kievan Rus for military aid against the formidable new enemy. The Rus princes, despite their internal rivalries and long-standing tensions with the Cuman Kipchaks, recognized the gravity of the threat. The Grand Prince of Kiev, Mstislav Romanovich, assembled a combined army drawn from multiple principalities, including Kiev, Chernigov, and Halych. This force, numbering between 30,000 and 80,000 men according to various historical sources, united with Khotan's Cuman cavalry, creating a formidable force intended to repel the Mongol advance. The combined army moved eastward to confront the Mongol forces, which were estimated to be significantly smaller, numbering around 20,000 men. The clash of these armies occurred in 1223 at the Battle of the Kalka River. The Ruses and Cuman forces, confident in their numerical superiority, attacked without a unified command structure. Mstislav of Halych's advance guard crossed the river first, engaging the Mongol vanguard. The Mongols, under the strategic direction of Subutai, executed a classic feigned retreat. They drew the disorganized Rus's forces, who broke ranks in their haste to pursue, into a prepared trap. The Mongol army, after retreating for several days, turned and faced the scattered Rus's forces. Mongol heavy cavalry, which had been hidden in reserve, then emerged to flank and encircle the disoriented Rus units. The combined army was systematically destroyed. The defeat was comprehensive and devastating. 3 Mstislav princes and countless other Rus and Cuman nobles were killed. The battle was not a decisive conquest of Rus, but a brutal demonstration of Mongol military superiority and a thorough assessment of Rus military capabilities and political disunity. Subutai and Jebe, having accomplished their objective, returned to the Mongol capital, bringing back with them invaluable intelligence about the lands and peoples to the west. This information would be instrumental in planning the larger invasion that was to come. The Battle of the Kalka River thus served as the opening act of the great Mongol westward expansion, a harbinger of the deluge of the steppe that would follow a little over a decade later, led by Jochi's son, Batu Khan, and the same masterful general, Subutai. The Mongol invasion of the Kievan Ruses began in 1237 as a meticulously planned campaign, not an opportunistic raid. Following the death of Genghis Khan, the great Khan Urgade, acting on the detailed intelligence gathered by Subutai and Gibi in 1223, ordered a full-scale assault. Command of this vast expedition was given to Batu Khan, a grandson of Genghis, with the veteran general Subutai serving as his chief strategist. The Mongol force, a massive and diverse army of cavalry, engineers, and support units, was a culmination of the military reforms and experiences of the past decades. The primary objectives were the systematic subjugation of the Russian principalities and the establishment of Mongol control over the western steppes. The invasion commenced with the assault on the independent Principality of Ryazan in December 1237. The Mongol army, utilizing sophisticated siege equipment developed from their campaigns in China and Persia, including catapults and siege towers, methodically breached the city's defenses. The destruction of Ryazan was total, its inhabitants were massacred, and the city was razed. This act of extreme brutality served as a deliberate psychological weapon designed to terrify other principalities into submission. The Mongol army then moved north, laying waste to the city of Vladimir and defeating the forces of the Grand Prince Yuri II at the Battle of the Sit River in 1238. This victory effectively eliminated any hope of a unified defense by the Rus's princes. With the northern principalities shattered, Batu Khan's armies turned south, beginning the second phase of their invasion. The historical accounts of this period describe a systematic and relentless advance. The Mongols, organized into multiple tumans or divisions, moved with a speed that the fragmented Rus's defense could not counter. They utilized a scorched earth policy, destroying fortifications, crops, and infrastructure to prevent any form of sustained resistance or retreat. This strategy, combined with their ability to concentrate overwhelming force at decisive points, gave the Mongols an insurmountable military advantage. The culmination of the invasion came with the siege of Kiev in 1240. Kiev, the historical and spiritual center of the Rus lands, was a heavily fortified city with a long history of resisting foreign invasion. However, the Mongols' use of over 20 catapults and other siege engines proved too much for the city's defenses. After a brief siege, the walls were breached and the city was taken. The subsequent destruction of Kiev was a profound symbolic and political event. The city's fall marked the end of the Kievan Rus as a unified political entity and signaled the complete subjugation of the Russian principalities. With the Rus lands now under their control, the Mongols established a system of indirect rule known as the Mongol yoke, which would define the political landscape of Eastern Europe for the next 2 centuries. With the conquest of the Kievan Rus complete, the vast expanse of the western steppe now fell under Mongol control. The victorious army, led by Batu Khan and Subutai, did not proceed with a full-scale conquest of Western Europe, a decision influenced by the death of the great Khan Urgade and the political tensions that emerged among the various Mongol princes. Instead, Batu consolidated his authority over the newly conquered territories, establishing his capital on the banks of the lower Volga River. This vast nomadic camp, known as the Golden Horde, was the seat of power for what was formerly called the Ulus of Jochi, the domain inherited by Batu from his father. This strategic location was not chosen arbitrarily. It provided access to the Caspian Sea and the trade routes of Central Asia, while also allowing for effective control over the subjugated Russian principalities and the surrounding Turkic populations. The early organization of this new domain was a blend of traditional Mongol military and administrative structures with the pragmatic needs of governing a vast multi-ethnic territory. Batu Khan, as the supreme ruler, held absolute authority. His court, a massive movable city of felt yurts and wagons, was the central hub for military, political, and economic decisions. The army, still organized under the decimal system of tumens, served as both a military force and an administrative body, ensuring the collection of tribute and the enforcement of the Great Yasa. The system of indirect rule over the Rus was formalized with princes required to travel to the Golden Horde's capital to receive their yarlik, a patent of authority that legitimized their rule in the eyes of the populace, but also affirmed their subservience to the Khan. The relationship between the Golden Horde and the central Mongol capital at Karakorum was initially one of a subordinate, though powerful, Ulus. Batu, as a senior member of the Borjigin clan and a grandson of Genghis Khan, was expected to acknowledge the authority of the Great Khan. However, the sheer distance between the two capitals and the growing political divisions within the larger Mongol Empire created a de facto independence. Batu's resentment over the perceived slights from his cousin Guyuk, the new Great Khan, fueled this separation. When Guyuk died, Batu's political maneuvers helped to ensure the election of his ally, Möngke Khan, a crucial event that solidified the autonomy of the Golden Horde and minimized the influence of Karakorum on its internal affairs. The establishment of the Golden Horde and its semi-independent status marked the beginnings of a distinct political and cultural identity. The Mongol ruling class, while maintaining their nomadic traditions, began to govern a territory that was largely Turkic and Slavic. The name Golden Horde itself, possibly derived from the magnificent golden yurt of the Khan, became synonymous with a powerful, centralized state that would eventually forge its own destiny. The foundation of this new domain was now firmly in place, ready to evolve from a nomadic military camp into a sophisticated and enduring civilization. With the Rus principalities subdued, the Golden Horde established a sophisticated system of indirect rule known as the Mongol yoke. This was not a period of direct military occupation, but rather a system of political and economic control designed to systematically extract resources while preventing the Rus from consolidating power. The framework of this subjugation was based on three primary mechanisms: the census, the collection of tribute, and the system of princely appointments. The first step in establishing Mongol authority was the Great Census. Beginning in the 1250s, Mongol officials known as Baskaks meticulously catalogued every person and household in the conquered lands. This was an unprecedented administrative undertaking for the region. Men, women, and children were counted, and their assets were recorded. The primary purpose of this census was to create an efficient and unchallengeable basis for taxation and, in some cases, military conscription. It systematically dismantled the old, localized tax systems and replaced them with a uniform imperial mandate. This process was met with resistance, as documented by uprisings in Novgorod and other cities, but it was ultimately successful and provided the Golden Horde with a clear understanding of its new resource base. Following the census, the collection of the tribute, or yasak, became the central feature of the Mongol Rus' relationship. This was a heavy and consistent tax, primarily paid in silver, furs, and other valuable goods. The Rus' princes were made responsible for its collection, but they were initially overseen by the Baskaks, who ensured compliance and reported directly to the Khan. This system was brutally effective, and its enforcement was absolute. Any failure to meet the required tribute resulted in punitive raids and military expeditions. As the Rus princes proved their reliability in collecting the tribute, the role of the Baskaks gradually diminished, and the responsibility was delegated entirely to the local rulers. This shift was a pragmatic move by the Mongols, which placed the onus of unpopular tax collection on the Rus princes, thereby deflecting potential rebellion away from the horde itself. The third pillar of this subjugation was the system of princely appointments. Each Rus' prince was required to travel to the Golden Horde's capital to receive a yarlik, a special charter that legitimized his rule. The Khans deliberately used this system to foster competition among the princes. The title of Grand Prince, for example, was not hereditary, but was granted by the Khan, often to whichever prince was most compliant or offered the most valuable gifts. This policy ensured that the Russian rulers were perpetually engaged in a struggle for the Khan's favour, a strategy that effectively prevented the formation of a unified Rus's coalition capable of challenging Mongol authority. The long, dangerous journey to the Horde's capital, where princes were often subjected to ritual humiliations and could be executed at the Khan's whim, was a constant reminder of their subservient status. This system of indirect rule, while allowing the Rus to maintain their cultural and religious institutions, created a political landscape of perpetual fragmentation and dependency. The Mongol yoke was thus a masterful and enduring form of political control that extracted immense wealth and maintained the Golden Horde's dominion for centuries. The establishment of the Golden Horde and the relative stability it brought to the vast Eurasian steppe facilitated an era of unprecedented peace and trade, a period often referred to as the Pax Mongolica. Following the initial campaigns of destruction, Mongol rule created a single, contiguous political entity that stretched from Eastern Europe to the Pacific. This eliminated the constant tribal warfare and territorial disputes that had previously hindered long-distance travel and commerce. The result was a dramatic revival and expansion of the Silk Road, which became the primary conduit for the movement of goods, ideas, and technologies between the civilizations of the East and West. The Golden Horde became a crucial link in this new trade network. Its capital, the nomadic camp that preceded the city of Sarai, was strategically located on the Volga River, a key artery connecting the Baltic with the Caspian Sea. This position gave the Horde control over major north-south trade routes that intersected with the east-west Silk Road. Mongol rulers, recognizing the economic benefits of this commerce, actively encouraged it. They ensured the security of merchants, providing protection from bandits and enforcing the Great Yasa to punish theft and other crimes. The Mongols also established a system of standardized weights and measures and a paper currency, which, while not always stable, facilitated transactions across vast distances. The flow of goods was extensive and varied. From the east, merchants brought silk, spices, porcelain, and gunpowder. From the west, they brought wool, linen, glass, and precious metals. The Golden Horde itself profited immensely from this exchange, primarily through the taxation of trade caravans. This revenue stream was vital for maintaining the Mongol military machine and supporting the lavish lifestyle of the Khan's court. The Mongol rulers also began to develop a more sedentary economy, with workshops producing crafts and goods that were then exported along the same trade routes. Beyond material goods, the Pax Mongolica facilitated a profound cultural exchange. Scholars, artists, and craftsmen from across Eurasia traveled freely, carrying with them new ideas and technologies. Islamic administrative practices, Persian art, Chinese medicine, and Central Asian astronomical knowledge all flowed westward into the Golden Horde's domain. The Mongol court became a cosmopolitan hub where individuals of different ethnicities and religions mingled, contributing to a unique cultural synthesis. This period of exchange was not a one-way street. Mongol military tactics and administrative techniques were also transmitted westward, influencing the military and political structures of the states they encountered. The Golden Horde's position as an intermediary in this global network of commerce and culture ensured its wealth and influence, laying the foundation for its development as a sophisticated and enduring civilization. The Golden Horde's evolution from a nomadic military camp to a sophisticated sedentary civilization is best exemplified by the founding and development of its capital, Sarai. The first city, known as Old Sarai, was established by Batu Khan on the lower Volga River. This location was chosen for its strategic and economic advantages. situated at a major crossroads of trade routes and providing a central hub for administering the vast Mongol domain. The city was initially a collection of yurts and permanent structures, a hybrid settlement that reflected the horde's transitional nature. However, under the reign of Burke Khan and later Uzbek Khan, Sarai was transformed into a magnificent and permanent urban centre. Sarai was a cosmopolitan metropolis that, at its peak, housed a population of over 600,000, making it one of the largest cities in the world during the 14th century. The city's physical structure reflected a fusion of architectural styles and cultural influences. Excavations at the site have revealed sophisticated urban planning, with a central citadel, a palace complex for the Khan, and distinct quarters for different ethnic and religious communities. The city's infrastructure included a network of streets, a piped water system, and public bathhouses. The architectural splendor was particularly notable in the mosques and madrasas that were constructed after the adoption of Islam as the state religion. These buildings, often adorned with intricate geometric patterns, colorful tiles and domes, showcased a blend of Persian, Central Asian, and local Turkic artistic traditions. As the political and economic heart of the Golden Horde, Sarai served as a central hub for commerce and diplomacy. It was a primary stop on the northern branch of the Silk Road, where merchants from Genoa, Venice, the Levant, and the Arab world exchanged goods with their counterparts from Central Asia and Russia. The city's markets teemed with commodities from across Eurasia, silks from China, spices from India, weapons from Persia, and furs and timber from Russes. The city minted its own coins, the dangs, which were used throughout the Horde's territories and were accepted in international trade. The immense wealth generated from this commerce was a crucial source of revenue for the Khanate, funding both military campaigns and the luxurious lifestyle of the elite. The city's diplomatic role was equally significant. It was the destination for foreign ambassadors, Rus's princes seeking a yarlik, and religious leaders from various denominations. The Mongol court, which included officials from a multitude of backgrounds, was known for its pragmatic religious tolerance, which allowed Christian, Jewish, and Muslim communities to coexist and even prosper within the city walls. This cultural synthesis was a defining feature of Sarai, influencing everything from the city's art and architecture to its legal and administrative systems. The city was a tangible representation of the Golden Horde's power and its evolution from a nomadic force to a sophisticated empire, a bridge between the civilizations of East and West. The reign of Burke Khan, who ruled the Golden Horde from 1257 to 1266, marked a pivotal and transformative period in the Khanate's history. Burke was the first Mongol ruler to officially embrace Islam, a decision that had profound theological, political, and social consequences for the Golden Horde and its relationship with the broader Mongol Empire. His conversion was a strategic move that solidified the Horde's identity and provided a religious foundation for its separation from the central authority of the Great Khan. Burke's exposure to Islam began early in his life, and he was reportedly a devout Muslim. His reasons for conversion were multifaceted. The Golden Horde's territories included a substantial population of Muslim merchants, Turkic peoples, and urban centers that were deeply integrated into the Islamic world. Adopting the religion of the majority of his subjects was a pragmatic decision that fostered stability and provided a common cultural and legal framework for governance. It also strengthened his commercial ties with the Muslim world, particularly with the Mamluk Sultanate of Egypt, a powerful ally against his rivals. The theological consequences of Burke's conversion were significant. It transformed the Golden Horde from a pagan Mongol domain into an Islamic superpower. This change was gradual, but it began a process of Islamization that would culminate with the reign of Uzbek Khan in the next century. Under Burke, mosques and madrasas were built in Sarai, and Islamic scholars and jurists were invited to the court to assist with administration and legal matters. This move gave the horde a new cultural identity that was distinct from the shamanistic traditions of the other Mongol Khanates. The political ramifications of Burke's conversion were even more far-reaching. It provided him with a religious justification to oppose his cousin Hulagu Khan, the ruler of the Ilkhanate in Persia. Hulagu's destructive campaigns against the Islamic heartland, which included the sack of Baghdad in 1258, were viewed by Burke as a sacrilegious act. This theological disagreement, combined with a bitter dispute over control of the rich pasturelands of Azerbaijan, led to a direct and open conflict between the two Mongol Khanates. This was the first major civil war within the Mongol Empire, and it irrevocably shattered the illusion of a unified Mongol state. Burke's reign thus marked the beginning of the Golden Horde's definitive break from the central authority of the Great Khan in Karakorum. He consciously positioned the horde as an independent power with its own distinct religious and political identity. His reign laid the groundwork for the Khanate's future, setting it on a path that would make it a major player in the Islamic world and a powerful, autonomous state in its own right. The era of Burke Khan was a turning point, signalling the end of a united Mongol Empire and the rise of a new Islamic superpower in the heart of Eurasia. The unity of the Mongol Empire, already strained by political and ideological differences, was irrevocably shattered by the open warfare that erupted between the Golden Horde and the Ilkhanate. This conflict, which raged for several years, was a pivotal event that not only defined the independence of the Golden Horde, but also set a precedent for future civil wars within the Mongol world. The roots of this devastating conflict were twofold: a bitter territorial dispute over the pasturelands of Azerbaijan, and a fundamental religious and political animosity. The territorial dispute centered on Azerbaijan, a strategically vital region with rich grazing lands that were coveted by both Burke Khan and his cousin Hulagu Khan. According to the Mongol tradition, established by Genghis Khan, the Caucasus region and Azerbaijan were considered part of the ancestral domain of the Jochi line, the family of Burke. However, Hulagu, following his conquest of Persia and the Levant, established his new kingdom, the Ilkhanate, and laid claim to these same territories. This direct challenge to the Golden Horde's authority created a geopolitical flashpoint that could only be resolved through military force. The religious dimension of the conflict was equally significant, serving as a powerful ideological justification for Burke's opposition to Hulagu. Burke, as the first Mongol Khan to embrace Islam, was deeply disturbed by Hulagu's destructive campaigns against the Islamic heartland. Hulagu's conquest of Persia culminated in the sack of Baghdad in 1258, a brutal event that led to the massacre of thousands and the destruction of the Abbasid Caliphate, the spiritual center of the Sunni Muslim world. This act was viewed by Burke as sacrilegious and an affront to the faith he had adopted. He used this religious grievance to rally support from his Muslim subjects and allies against his pagan cousin, framing the conflict not just as a territorial dispute, but as a holy war. The war began in 1262 and was fought with a ferocity that characterized the Mongol military. Both sides, drawing on the immense military resources of their respective domains, clashed in a series of battles across the Caucasus. Burke Khan, in a strategic alliance with the Mamluks of Egypt, who were also hostile to the Ilkhanate, created a pincer movement that stretched Hulagu's forces. The war, however, was inconclusive in its early stages, with neither side able to gain a decisive advantage. The fighting was marked by large-scale battles, but also by the destruction of trade routes and the disruption of local economies, which had previously flourished under the Pax Mongolica. The conflict irrevocably shattered the illusion of a unified Mongol empire. The fighting between the descendants of Genghis Khan a direct violation of the Great Yasa, proved that a single centralized Mongol authority no longer existed. The Golden Horde, under Burke Khan, emerged from this conflict as a fully independent state, distinct in its political, territorial, and religious identity. The war solidified its control over the Caucasus and its position as a major power in the Islamic world, a legacy that would be built upon by its successors. The geopolitical landscape of the mid-13th century was transformed by a powerful and strategic alliance between two seemingly disparate entities: the Golden Horde, a vast Mongol state in the Eurasian steppes, and the Mamluk Sultanate of Egypt, a military dynasty ruling the Levant. This diplomatic partnership, forged against their common enemy the Ilkhanate, created a new geopolitical axis that would dominate the Eastern Mediterranean for decades. The alliance was a pragmatic response to the territorial and religious ambitions of Hulagu Khan, whose Ilkhanate posed an existential threat to both powers. For the Mamluks, the alliance was a matter of survival. Their momentous victory over Hulagu's army at the Battle of Ain Jalut in 1260 had temporarily halted the Mongol advance into the Levant. However, they recognized that the Ilkhanate remained a formidable enemy with a deep desire for revenge and a vast reservoir of military strength. A permanent alliance with a power that could attack the Ilkhanate from the north was a strategic necessity. Mamluk Sultan Baybars, a master strategist and diplomat, understood that a pincer movement was the most effective way to counter Hulagu's military might. He initiated diplomatic overtures to Burke Khan, the ruler of the Golden Horde, who was already embroiled in a territorial and ideological conflict with Hulagu. Burke Khan, for his part, was motivated by a combination of religious conviction and political calculation. As the first Muslim Mongol Khan, he was deeply offended by Hulagu's sack of Baghdad and the subsequent destruction of the Caliphate. He viewed Hulagu's actions as an attack on the faith he had adopted and a violation of Islamic law. This religious animosity provided a powerful justification for war. Furthermore, the alliance with the Mamluks gave Burke a strategic advantage. It provided a powerful military partner to the south of the Ilkhanate, forcing Hulagu to fight on two fronts. The alliance also had significant economic benefits, as the Mamluks, controlling the key trade routes of the Red Sea and Egypt, were a wealthy power. The diplomatic exchanges between the two states were extensive. The Mamluk Sultanate, through its emissaries, sent lavish gifts to the Golden Horde, including fine silks, weapons, and other luxury goods, which were highly valued by the nomadic elite. In return, Burke Khan provided the Mamluks with a steady supply of slaves from the Rus lands, who were then trained to serve in the Mamluk military. This trade, while morally indefensible, was a critical component of the alliance, as it provided the Mamluks with a continuous supply of fresh troops. The alliance resulted in decades of sustained pressure on the Ilkhanate. The Golden Horde repeatedly launched campaigns into the Caucasus, forcing Hulagu to divert military resources from the Levant. This allowed the Mamluks to consolidate their control over the region and systematically expel the remaining Crusader states. The alliance was a testament to the pragmatic nature of medieval diplomacy. It was an arrangement born of shared military necessity against a common enemy, and it created a new geopolitical reality that profoundly influenced the balance of power in the Mongol world and the Eastern Mediterranean. The relationship between the Golden Horde and its Russian vassals was a complex and enduring political arrangement that defined the fate of Eastern Europe for over 2 centuries. This was not a period of consistent, outright warfare, but a sophisticated system of indirect rule built on tribute, intimidation, and calculated diplomacy. The primary instrument of Mongol control was the Yarlik, a patent of authority that all Rus's princes were required to obtain from the Khan to legitimize their rule. The Yarlik was not simply a ceremonial document, it was a formal decree that granted the prince his title and territories. This system intentionally fostered a state of perpetual competition among the princes, who were forced to vie for Mongol favour through lavish gifts and displays of subservience. This political dynamic, which prevented the Rus from forming a unified military or political coalition, was a masterful strategy that ensured the Horde's continued dominion. The Rus' princes were, in effect, vassals of the Khan, and this relationship was formalized by their required presence at the Golden Horde's capital, Sarai. The journey to Sarai was perilous and humiliating, serving as a constant reminder of their subordinate status. Princes were often forced to kneel before the Khan and participate in rituals that affirmed his supreme authority. This system also gave the Khan the power to arbitrate succession disputes and to directly intervene in Rus political affairs, using a system of military expeditions against rebellious or disobedient princes. The most famous example of this was the campaign against the Principality of Tver, which the Mongols devastated with the aid of their Muscovite allies. The Russian Orthodox Church played a crucial and often paradoxical role in this relationship. The Mongols, in a pragmatic move, granted the Church a special status, including exemptions from taxes and forced labour. This policy, enshrined in a Yarlik of its own, was a shrewd calculation. By co-opting the spiritual authority of the Church, the Khans ensured a degree of popular loyalty and prevented the clergy from organising a unified religious resistance. In return, the Church became a critical intermediary, often negotiating on behalf of the Rus people and helping to maintain the delicate political balance. The metropolitan of Kiev and all Ruses was a key figure in this relationship, and his appointment was often influenced by the Khan's court. Over time, this system of control, while brutal, created a unique political and cultural synthesis. The Rus' princes, particularly those of the Grand Principality of Moscow, learned to navigate the treacherous world of Mongol politics with great skill. They used their position as tax collectors for the Horde to consolidate power and wealth, a policy that, over generations, would allow them to become the dominant power in the region. The relationship was a complex tapestry of subjugation and survival, a period that laid the groundwork for the autocratic political system that would define the future Russian state. The relationship between the Golden Horde and the Russian Orthodox Church was a unique and crucial aspect of the Mongol yoke, a political arrangement that was both pragmatic and paradoxical. While the Mongols were initially pagan and later converted to Islam, they did not persecute the Orthodox Church. Instead, they adopted a policy of shrewd co-option, granting the Church a special legal and fiscal status that ensured its loyalty and facilitated the Horde's administration of its Russian territories. This policy was enshrined in a series of Yarliks issued by the Khans, which granted the Church sweeping exemptions from taxation and forced labour. The clergy, their households, and their properties were all protected from the heavy tribute that was levied on the rest of the Rus population. This protection extended not only to the Church's landed wealth and monasteries, but also to the ecclesiastical courts and the clergy's internal legal structures. This was not an act of religious tolerance for its own sake, but a calculated political move. By granting the Church these privileges, the Khans secured a powerful, influential ally within the conquered population. The Church, in return, became a reliable partner in maintaining order and ensuring the compliance of the populace. The collaboration was mutually beneficial. For the Mongols, it provided a parallel power structure that helped to legitimize their rule in the eyes of the Rus people, who were devoutly Christian. It prevented the clergy from becoming a focal point for organized anti-Mongol resistance, as they had a vested interest in the continuation of a system that protected their wealth and status. For the Church, the relationship was a matter of institutional survival and growth. The tax exemptions allowed the church to accumulate vast amounts of wealth and land, becoming one of the most powerful economic entities in the Rus lands. This period of Mongol rule, ironically, was a time of remarkable expansion for the Russian Orthodox Church, which used its newfound wealth and influence to build new monasteries, churches, and cathedrals. The symbiotic relationship also elevated the political role of the metropolitan of Kiev and all Rus, the head of the church. The metropolitan was a key intermediary between the Khans and the Rus princes, often travelling to Sarai to negotiate on behalf of his flock. His appointment, though a religious matter, was often subject to the approval of the Khan, which further entwined the spiritual and political spheres. The church's collaboration with the Mongols was a source of great controversy in later historical narratives, but during this period, it was a pragmatic necessity that ensured the survival of the Rus' people and the institution itself. The Khan's policy of granting privileges to the church created an enduring power structure, and the wealth and political influence the church acquired under Mongol rule would have immense and lasting consequences for the development of the future Russian state. The Golden Horde, while founded and governed by a Mongol ruling class, was a multi-ethnic state whose demographic and cultural landscape was defined by its vast and diverse subject populations. Over time, the Mongol elite, a relatively small minority, underwent a profound process of Turkicization and Islamization. This gradual cultural assimilation was a defining feature of the Horde's history and led to the rise of a new, distinct Tatar identity. The primary demographic components of the Golden Horde were the Turkic peoples of the Eurasian steppe, particularly the Cumans, or Kipchaks, and the Volga Bulgars. The Cumans were a formidable nomadic people who had dominated the western steppes for centuries before the Mongol conquest. Their military prowess and nomadic lifestyle were similar to those of the Mongols, which made their integration into the Mongol army and ruling structure a pragmatic and relatively smooth process. The Mongols, who had a policy of integrating conquered peoples into their military, absorbed large numbers of Cuman warriors into their own ranks, a move that provided the Horde with a powerful and experienced cavalry force. The Volga Bulgars, a sedentary, urbanized Turkic people with a long history of trade and Islamic faith, also became a key component of the Horde. Their cities, though initially destroyed by the Mongol invasion, were rebuilt and became crucial centers of commerce and administration. The sedentary Turkic populations, with their knowledge of urban life, trade, and legal systems, provided the administrative and economic expertise that the Mongols, as a primarily nomadic people, initially lacked. Their conversion to Islam, which began in the 10th century, was a critical factor in the Horde's later conversion and integration into the Islamic world. The Mongol ruling class, a relatively small group of warriors and aristocrats, began to assimilate into this larger Turkic population. This process was driven by several factors, including intermarriage and the sheer weight of numbers. The Mongol language and traditional shamanistic beliefs began to fade, replaced by the Cuman Kipchak Turkic language and, eventually, Islam. This cultural fusion resulted in the formation of a new ethnic identity. The term Tatar, which was originally used by the Mongols to refer to a rival tribe they had conquered, became a catch-all term used by Europeans and Rus for the peoples of the Golden Horde. Over time, the name was adopted by the peoples of the Horde themselves, and it became synonymous with the new Turkicized and Islamic culture of the state. The demographic transformation of the Golden Horde was a slow but inexorable process that had immense long-term consequences. The Golden Horde was no longer a purely Mongol empire. It was a Turkic-Mongol Islamic state with a unique cultural identity. This new identity would define the Horde's successor states, such as the Kazan, Astrakhan, and Crimean Khanates, and it would leave a lasting cultural and genetic legacy across the Eurasian steppe. The reign of Uzbek Khan, who ruled the Golden Horde from 1313 to 1341, is widely considered the Khanate's golden age, a period defined by extraordinary prosperity, stability, and a definitive cultural identity. Uzbek Khan's most consequential act was the formal and official adoption of Islam as the state religion of the Golden Horde. While earlier Khans such as Burke had embraced the faith, Uzbek's decree transformed Islam from a tolerated religion to a central component of the state's political and legal structure. This decision was not merely a matter of personal piety, it was a sophisticated political maneuver that had far-reaching consequences for the Khanate's internal and external affairs. The official Islamization of the Golden Horde had several critical impacts. It provided the Mongol elite with a new, unified cultural and legal framework that replaced the old shamanistic traditions and the great yasa, which was ill-suited for governing a large, settled Islamic population. The Mongol ruling class, already undergoing a process of Turkicization, now completed its assimilation into the larger Turkic and Islamic populace. The Khanate became a powerful and respected member of the Islamic world, with diplomatic and commercial ties strengthening with the Mamluk Sultanate of Egypt and the Ilkhanate, with which it had previously been at war. Uzbek Khan, in a strategic move, used his newfound religious authority to strengthen his position and consolidate power against the old Mongol aristocracy who resisted the change. Those who refused to convert faced persecution or exile, ensuring the ideological and political cohesion of the state. Uzbek's reign was a period of unprecedented economic growth and stability. The Khanate's position at the crossroads of the Silk Road and the north-south trade routes allowed it to prosper from the flow of goods and ideas between east and west. The city of Sarai became a magnificent capital, a truly cosmopolitan center of commerce, diplomacy, and culture. Under Uzbek's patronage, a massive construction program was undertaken, which included the erection of beautiful mosques, elaborate palaces, and public works. The city's markets thrived, with merchants from Italy, the Byzantine Empire, and the Islamic world all conducting business under the protection of the Khan. This economic prosperity was also reflected in the stability of the Rus lands, where the tribute, though still heavy, was collected with a more organized and predictable system, allowing the Rus' principalities to develop their own economies. The internal stability and external power of the Golden Horde under Uzbek Khan were a testament to his astute leadership. He was a master of both military strategy and diplomacy, ensuring the borders of his vast empire were secure while promoting a period of cultural flourishing within. His reign cemented the Golden Horde's identity as a Turkic-Islamic state and laid the groundwork for the powerful successor states that would emerge from its eventual fragmentation. Uzbek Khan's legacy was thus a period of immense prosperity and the final definitive step in the Golden Horde's transformation from a military power to a unique and enduring civilization. The reign of Uzbek Khan marked a definitive transition for the Golden Horde, a period during which it moved decisively from a nomadic military power to a settled urban civilization. This transformation was most visibly demonstrated by an ambitious construction program centered on the capital city of Sarai, located on the lower Volga River. The city, which had existed in various forms since Batu Khan's time, was expanded and rebuilt on an unprecedented scale, reflecting the wealth, stability, and cultural identity of Uzbek Khan's era. This urban development was a strategic decision to consolidate power, facilitate trade, and project the image of a permanent and powerful Islamic state. The city of New Sarai, established under Uzbek Khan, was a masterwork of urban planning and a testament to the Khanate's immense resources. It was a massive metropolis, rivaling the largest cities of Europe and the Islamic world in size and grandeur. Archaeological evidence from the site reveals a sophisticated urban layout, with a carefully planned grid of streets, a well-developed water supply system using terracotta pipes, and a public infrastructure that included monumental bathhouses. The city was a true cosmopolitan center, with distinct quarters for different ethnic and religious communities, including Muslims, Christians, and Jews, who coexisted under the Khan's authority. This diversity was a deliberate policy designed to attract merchants, artisans, and scholars from across Eurasia. The architectural projects of Uzbek Khan's reign were a direct reflection of the Horde's official Islamization. The construction of mosques and madrasas, or religious schools, was a top priority. These buildings were not only places of worship and learning, but also powerful symbols of the Khan's commitment to the faith. The architecture of these structures showcased a fusion of styles, blending Persian and Central Asian Islamic traditions with local Turkic artistry. Minarets, domes, and elaborate facades, adorned with glazed tiles and intricate geometric patterns, became a defining feature of the city. These buildings attracted a continuous influx of Islamic scholars, jurists, and Sufi mystics who contributed to the city's intellectual and spiritual life and helped solidify the Golden Horde's place within the Islamic world. This construction program signaled a profound shift away from the traditional nomadic lifestyle. While the Mongol military elite still valued their horsemanship and nomadic traditions, the state's economic and political power was now anchored in a permanent urban center. Sarai became the administrative heart of the empire, the nexus of its tribute system, and the central marketplace for its extensive trade networks. The city's development was not just about building. It was about institutionalizing a new form of governance that was based on sedentary legal and administrative practices. This transition allowed the Golden Horde to govern its large, diverse population more effectively and project an image of power and permanence that transcended the older, more transient nature of nomadic empires. The legacy of Uzbek Khan's building projects was thus not just a magnificent city, but the final, decisive step in the Horde's transformation into an enduring and powerful urban state. The Golden Horde's system of subjugation, centered on the collection of tribute and the subservience of the Rus's princes, was a source of immense wealth and political stability for the Khanate. However, over time, this very system also sowed the seeds of its own decline. As the Rus principalities, particularly Moscow and Tver, grew in economic and political power, the delicate balance of the Mongol yoke began to shift. The princes, who were forced to compete for the Khan's favor, learned to exploit this rivalry to their own advantage, slowly consolidating their power and preparing for a future of independence. This consolidation was met with a brutal reminder of Mongol authority, but it also highlighted the growing fragility of the Horde's grip. The Tver Rebellion of 1327 stands as a critical example of this shifting dynamic. The Principality of Tver, under its prince Alexander Mikhailovich, had grown in prominence and was a major rival to the rising power of Moscow. The catalyst for the rebellion was the arrival of the Mongol official Chol Khan, or Shevkal, at Tver. Chol Khan's entourage, along with his heavy-handed and corrupt administration, created widespread resentment among the Tver populace. The final provocation was a dispute that led to the murder of a priest's son, which ignited a popular uprising. The people of Tver rose up, killing Chol Khan and his entire Mongol entourage, an act of open defiance against the authority of the Golden Horde itself. The response from the Golden Horde was swift and devastating. Uzbek Khan, the ruler of the Horde, viewed the rebellion not just as a local uprising, but as a direct challenge to his supreme authority. He immediately dispatched a punitive expedition. But in a move of calculated political strategy, he did so with the aid of a formidable rival, Ivan I Danilovich, the Prince of Moscow. Ivan I, known as Kalita or Moneybags, used this opportunity to his immense advantage. He marched with a Mongol army and systematically laid waste to the Principality of Tver, annihilating its military and political infrastructure. Prince Alexander was forced to flee, and Tver was brutally punished for its insubordination. The Grand Prince title, which Tver had briefly held, was then granted to Ivan Kalita, solidifying Moscow's dominance and reinforcing the Mongol policy of using Rus's princes against each other. The Tver Rebellion was a brutal reminder of the Khan's power, but its long-term consequences were complex. While the Khanate reasserted its authority through a punitive expedition, the event also demonstrated that Mongol rule was not invincible. It was a sign that the Rus's principalities were no longer a passive, subjugated people, but a growing political force capable of organized resistance. The rebellion also had a profound, if unintended, consequence of strengthening Moscow. Ivan Kalita, having proven his loyalty and effectiveness to the Khan, used his position as a collector of the yasak to accumulate immense wealth. This wealth in turn allowed Moscow to expand its territories, build a stronger military, and lay the foundations for a future state that would eventually challenge and ultimately break the Mongol yoke. The death of Uzbek Khan in 1341 marked a definitive end to the Golden Horde's golden age of stability and prosperity. His long and successful reign had provided a strong, centralized authority. But his passing ushered in a new era of intense political instability and internecine conflict. This period, which would rage for over 2 decades, was characterized by a rapid succession of weak Khans, a series of assassinations, and the gradual erosion of the central authority that had been so carefully built. The resulting power vacuum opened the door for ambitious military commanders and powerful emirs to seize control, becoming the true power brokers behind a facade of Borjigin rule. Uzbek's immediate successors, his sons Tinibeg and Janibeg, attempted to maintain the strong centralized authority of their father. However, the old rivalries among the Mongol aristocracy and the ambitious factions within the court quickly resurfaced. The reign of Janibeg, who ruled from 1342 to 1357, was initially a period of relative stability, but his death in 1357 triggered a deep and prolonged succession crisis. His son, Berdi Beg, consolidated his rule by executing 12 of his male relatives, a ruthless act intended to eliminate all potential rivals. However, this action only deepened the divisions within the horde, as powerful emirs, disgusted by the bloodshed and seeing an opportunity to expand their own influence, began to openly defy the Khan's authority. Following Berdi Beg's assassination in 1359, the Golden Horde descended into a period of chaos known as the Great Troubles. The central authority collapsed entirely, with over 25 Khans reigning in rapid succession over the next 20 years. Many of these Khans were little more than puppets, installed and deposed by powerful warlords who had amassed their own armies and controlled vast territories. The Great Horde was no longer a unified state, but a collection of competing factions, each with its own claimant to the throne. The capital city of Sarai, once a magnificent symbol of Mongol power, was repeatedly sacked and captured by these rival claimants, its population decimated, and its infrastructure destroyed. The fragmentation of power was systematic. The powerful Mongol warlord Mamai, for example, a non-Borjigin who was a Beklebek, or military commander, controlled the western half of the Horde's territory. He installed his own puppet Khans, often from the Chinggisid lineage, to legitimize his rule, while he held the real military and political power. In the eastern part of the Horde, other warlords and local Khans established their own independent domains, effectively breaking away from the central authority. The once unified state was now a mosaic of warring factions. and its immense wealth, which had once flowed to Sarai, was now distributed among these competing powers. This period of sustained instability crippled the Golden Horde, leaving it vulnerable to both internal collapse and external aggression. The decline of the dynasty was thus not a sudden fall, but a prolonged and self-inflicted crisis that ultimately led to the disintegration of the empire. The mid-14th century, a period already marked by the political turmoil of the Great Troubles, saw the Golden Horde and its subject populations face a new and devastating crisis: the arrival of the bubonic plague, or Black Death. This pandemic, which originated in Central Asia and spread along the very trade routes the Mongols had fostered, had a profound and catastrophic impact on the Horde's social, demographic, and economic structures. The plague did not cause the fragmentation of the Golden Horde, but it accelerated its decline and exacerbated the political instability that was already rampant. The plague's entry into the Golden Horde is famously associated with the Mongol siege of the Genoese trading city of Kaffa in Crimea around 1346. Historical accounts suggest that the besieging Mongol army, afflicted by the disease, catapulted the infected corpses of its soldiers over the city walls in a form of primitive biological warfare. This action led to the spread of the plague among the Genoese defenders and merchants. The fleeing survivors carried the disease by ship to Constantinople and then westward to Europe, where it would cause a devastating demographic collapse. However, the plague had already begun to move eastward along the Silk Road, and its arrival in the Golden Horde's territories was inevitable. The demographic impact of the Black Death on the Golden Horde was immense. The Khanate's population, which was a blend of nomadic Turkic peoples, settled agriculturalists and urban dwellers, was decimated. The plague was particularly virulent in the densely populated cities, such as the capital Sarai, where it spread rapidly and indiscriminately. Sarai, which at its peak was a thriving cosmopolitan center, saw a drastic reduction in its population. The death of skilled artisans, merchants, and administrators crippled the city's economic and political functions, undermining the very foundation of the Horde's sedentary power. The economic consequences were equally severe. Trade, which was the lifeblood of the Horde, was severely disrupted as key routes were closed and merchants either died or abandoned their enterprises. The tribute system, which depended on a healthy and productive population, collapsed in many areas, leading to a precipitous decline in the Khanate's revenue. The Black Death also had significant political consequences. The high mortality rates affected all levels of society, from the common peasant to the Mongol aristocracy. The rapid deaths of khans and powerful emirs created a power vacuum, making the already chaotic succession crises even more frequent and violent. It was during this period that the central authority of the Khan was further eroded, as local warlords and emirs who had survived the plague began to seize power and territory, with little resistance from a weakened and disorganized central government. The plague thus acted as a powerful accelerant to the decline of the Golden Horde. It magnified the internal problems of succession and fragmentation, and it left the state a shadow of its former self, a weakened and vulnerable entity ready to be dismantled by internal warlords and external rivals. The political chaos that followed the death of Uzbek Khan, a period exacerbated by the devastating effects of the Black Death, led to the systematic erosion of central authority in the Golden Horde. The hereditary power of the Khans, derived from their direct descent from Genghis Khan, became a fragile symbol rather than a source of genuine power. In this power vacuum, a new class of powerful military commanders and tribal leaders, known as emirs, rose to prominence. These kingmakers, who often did not possess the royal Chinggisid bloodline, became the true power brokers of the Horde, controlling vast armies and territories, and installing their chosen khans as puppets to legitimize their own rule. This period of fragmentation is historically known as the Great Troubles, or in Russian, Velikaya Zamjatnya. The central authority of the Khanate collapsed entirely, and the once unified state splintered into a collection of warring factions. The capital of Sarai, once the seat of a powerful and prosperous empire, was captured and recaptured by rival forces, its population fleeing and its economic life crippled. The political stability that had defined the reign of Uzbek Khan was replaced by a continuous state of civil war, where the only law was the might of the strongest warlord. The most prominent of these kingmakers was Mamai, a powerful Beklerbek, or commander-in-chief, who did not belong to the Chinggisid lineage. Mamai, through his military genius and political cunning, established control over the western half of the Horde's territory, from the Crimean Peninsula to the lower Volga. To legitimize his rule, he systematically installed and deposed a series of puppet Khans, all of whom were descendants of Genghis Khan. This was a crucial political strategy, as it allowed him to maintain the fiction of a unified state under Borjigin authority while he wielded the actual military and administrative power. Mamai's vast army, which was primarily composed of his loyal Turkic forces, became the dominant military power in the western steppe. Another powerful figure who rose during this period was Edigi, a Nogai emir who would later exert immense influence over the Horde's successor states. Edigi, also a non-Chinggisid, was a master diplomat and military commander. He allied himself with the Lithuanian Grand Duchy against the powerful Khan Toktamish and played a central role in the political life of the Horde for over 2 decades. Like Mamai, Edigi used his military power to install and depose Khans, thereby ensuring his own dominance in the political affairs of the splintering empire. The rise of the kingmakers fundamentally altered the political structure of the Golden Horde. The old system, which was based on the hereditary authority of the Khan, was replaced by a new system based on military power and personal loyalty. This shift had a lasting impact on the successor states that would later emerge from the Horde's fragmentation. The period of the Great Troubles thus serves as a critical chapter in the Golden Horde's decline, as the state, torn apart by internal strife and the ambitions of its own military commanders, was left a shadow of its former self. The period known as the Great Troubles had left the Golden Horde fragmented. Its central authority collapsed, and its power diffused among warring emirs. The fragile stability of this fractured state was momentarily overturned by the rise of Toktamish, a descendant of Genghis Khan, who, with the powerful backing of the Turco-Mongol conqueror Tamerlane, sought to restore the Horde to its former glory. Toktamish's ascendancy was a direct challenge to the authority of the powerful warlord Mamai, who had controlled the western half of the Horde for over 2 decades. With Tamerlane's military and political support, Toktamish methodically defeated his rivals, consolidating his rule and briefly reunifying the Golden Horde into a formidable single state. This period of renewed unity, though short-lived, was a testament to the fact that the Horde, under a strong Khan, was still a potent military and political force. Toktamish's reign was defined by his ambitious campaigns to reassert the Horde's authority over its former subject territories, particularly the Russian principalities. The Ruses, emboldened by their symbolic victory over Mamai at the Battle of Kulikovo in 1380, had become increasingly independent, with Moscow's Grand Prince Dmitry Donskoy openly defying the tribute system. Toktamish viewed this as a direct affront to his newly unified state and a necessary target for a campaign to restore the Khanate's prestige. In 1382, he launched a major military expedition against the Rus lands, a campaign that would serve as a chilling reminder of the Mongol war machine's capabilities. Toktamish's campaign was a masterstroke of strategy. He advanced on Moscow with a large and disciplined army, catching the principality by surprise. Moscow, confident in its recent victory and believing that the Horde's power was broken, was unprepared for a siege. The city's wooden walls, while formidable against smaller raids, were vulnerable to a determined Mongol assault. Toktamish utilized a combination of deceptive tactics and psychological warfare. He first sent small contingents ahead, feigning peaceful intentions, which allowed his main army to reach the city's walls before the inhabitants could fully prepare their defenses. The subsequent siege was a brief but brutal affair. The citizens of Moscow, demoralized by the Khan's overwhelming force and the absence of their Grand Prince, who had fled, soon surrendered. The Mongols, in a brutal act intended to reimpose their authority, sacked the city and massacred its inhabitants. The sacking of Moscow had its intended effect. It re-established the Golden Horde's dominance over the Rus principalities and forced them to resume the payment of the heavy tribute. The Grand Principality of Moscow, once again, was a vassal of the Khan, and its military victory at Kulikovo was rendered a costly and hollow triumph. This campaign, however, was also the high watermark of Toktamish's reign. The Khan's success and his increasing power soon brought him into direct conflict with his former benefactor, Tamerlane. Their rivalry would lead to a series of devastating wars that would, once and for all, shatter the unity of the Golden Horde and set the stage for its final decline. Toktamish's last stand of unity was, in the end, a fleeting moment of renewed power, a final echo of a once unbreakable empire. The reunification of the Golden Horde under Toktamish was a fleeting moment of restored power, built upon a fragile alliance with the Turco-Mongol conqueror Tamerlane. This alliance, however, contained the seeds of its own destruction. Tamerlane, who had established his own vast empire in Central Asia, was a brilliant military strategist with ambitions that extended far beyond his initial support for Toktamish. As Toktamish's power grew and his campaigns became more successful, he began to act with a degree of independence that his former benefactor could not tolerate. This rivalry, a clash between two of the late medieval world's most formidable military leaders, would lead to a series of devastating wars that would, once and for all, shatter the Golden Horde's unity and its position as a major power. The conflict between Tamerlane and Toktamish was fundamentally a struggle for dominance over the Eurasian trade routes and control of the Mongol legacy. Toktamish, emboldened by his successes, began to challenge Tamerlane's authority in the Caucasus and Central Asia. He launched a series of raids on Tamerlane's territories, a direct provocation that could not go unanswered. Tamerlane, who viewed himself as the true heir to Genghis Khan's empire, saw Toktamish's actions as a betrayal and a threat to his own commercial and political interests. In a series of massive military campaigns in the 1390s, Tamerlane set out to systematically dismantle the Golden Horde. The campaigns were fought with a ferocity that was characteristic of both commanders. The first major engagement occurred in 1391 at the Battle of the Kondorcha River. Tamerlane's army, a well-disciplined force that included a large number of infantry and elite cavalry, engaged Toktamish's more mobile but less organized forces. Tamerlane utilized a combination of tactical innovations and psychological warfare to overwhelm the Horde's army. While the battle was a Pyrrhic victory for Tamerlane, it was a profound blow to the Horde's military strength. The decisive campaign, however, came in 1395 at the Battle of the Tver River. Tamerlane's army, having been resupplied and reinforced, annihilated Toktamish's forces. The battle was a strategic masterpiece for Tamerlane, who utilized a strategy of feigned retreat and a powerful reserve to encircle and destroy the Horde's army. The destruction of the Golden Horde's armies was followed by a systematic dismantling of its economic and political infrastructure. Tamerlane's forces laid waste to the Horde's major cities, including the capital Sarai, which was completely sacked and razed. The city, which had once been a magnificent centre of trade and culture, was reduced to ruins. Tamerlane also destroyed the Horde's key trade networks, particularly those in Crimea and the lower Volga, crippling its ability to generate revenue. This series of campaigns not only eliminated Tokhtamış as a political rival, but it also dealt a fatal blow to the Golden Horde itself. The state's military, political, and economic foundations were shattered, leaving it a fragmented collection of weakened successor states and warring emirs. The shadow of Tamerlane had, once and for all, brought an end to the era of a unified Golden Horde. The decline and fragmentation of the Golden Horde, a process accelerated by the destructive campaigns of Tamerlane and the internal chaos of the Great Troubles, created a power vacuum in Eastern Europe that provided a unique opportunity for the rise of a new political entity, the Grand Principality of Moscow. Moscow's ascent was not an act of open defiance or a dramatic military conquest, but a slow and methodical process of consolidation and political maneuvering. The Muscovite princes, through a combination of diplomatic savvy, strategic cunning, and a shrewd understanding of Mongol politics, systematically built their power base and positioned themselves as the rightful heirs to the Rus lands. The Muscovite princes, from the reign of Ivan I Kalita onwards, were masters of adapting to the political realities of the Mongol yoke. They recognized that open rebellion against the Golden Horde was a suicidal strategy. Instead, they embraced a policy of collaboration and subservience. Ivan Kalita, for example, cultivated a reputation as a loyal and reliable vassal of the Khan, earning his trust and, more importantly, the exclusive right to collect the Mongol tribute from the other Rus principalities. This position was a source of immense power. It allowed Moscow to accumulate vast wealth, which was then used to buy land, expand its territories, and strengthen its military. By placing the burden of tribute collection on the Muscovite princes, the Mongols inadvertently provided them with the administrative tools and financial resources necessary to consolidate their own power. The strategic location of Moscow was also a crucial factor in its rise. Situated in the relatively forested and geographically isolated region between the Volga and Oka rivers, it was less vulnerable to the devastating raids that plagued the southern steppes. This relative security attracted a continuous influx of settlers who sought refuge from the chaos of the Mongol raids and the internecine wars of the other principalities. This steady population growth provided Moscow with a growing labor force, a larger tax base, and a constant supply of military recruits. The Muscovite princes also skillfully co-opted the power of the Russian Orthodox Church. They persuaded the metropolitan of Kiev and all Rus to move his see to Moscow, a move that transformed the city into the spiritual center of the Rus lands. This alliance with the Church provided the Muscovite princes with a powerful ideological justification for their growing power. They were no longer just another vassal of the Khan. They were the defenders of the faith and the protectors of all Orthodox Christians in the region. This moral authority, combined with their military and economic power, allowed them to slowly and systematically absorb the other principalities, a process that was often facilitated by the Mongols themselves, who preferred a single, stable vassal to a collection of constantly warring rivals. The decline of the Golden Horde, therefore, was a period of both crisis and opportunity, and the Muscovite princes were uniquely positioned to seize that opportunity and lay the foundations for the future Russian state. The Battle of Kulikovo in 1380 stands as a watershed moment in Russian history, a symbolic triumph that, while not ending Mongol suzerainty, fundamentally altered the psychological and political landscape of the Mongol yoke. This decisive engagement was the culmination of decades of a slow consolidation of power by the Grand Principality of Moscow and the fragmentation of the Golden Horde, which was now ruled in its western half by the powerful warlord Mamai. For Mamai, the defeat of Dmitry Donskoy and the reimposition of heavy tribute was a political necessity to legitimize his rule. For the Rus princes, the battle was an opportunity to challenge the very notion of Mongol invincibility. The catalyst for the battle was the growing defiance of the Rus princes, who, under the leadership of Dmitry Ivanovich of Moscow, had been increasingly refusing to pay the required tribute. Mamai, who was a non-Chinggisid and therefore lacked the genealogical authority of a true Khan, could not tolerate this insubordination. He assembled a vast army, a multi-ethnic force that included not only the Turkic cavalry of the Western Horde, but also contingents of Genoese mercenaries and Circassian tribesmen. His objective was a full-scale punitive expedition to crush the rebellion and reassert his absolute authority over the Rus lands. Dmitry Donskoy, in a historic display of unity, managed to rally a combined Rus' army, drawing forces from a wide array of principalities, including Vladimir, Suzdal, and Rostov. The Rus army, numbering somewhere between 30,000 and 60,000 men according to various sources, was a departure from the fragmented and disorganized forces that had been easily defeated at the Battle of the Kalka River in 1223. This time, the Rus army was led by a single determined commander and united by a shared sense of defiance against Mongol rule. The two armies converged on the Kulikovo field, a vast expanse of land located at the confluence of the Don and Nepriadva rivers. The battle, which took place on September 8, 1380, was a bloody and protracted affair. The Rus' army deployed in a defensive formation, utilizing a large reserve force hidden in a nearby forest. Mamai's forces, confident in their numerical superiority and the strength of their cavalry, launched a series of powerful attacks against the Rus flanks. The Rus' army, though suffering heavy casualties, held its ground. The turning point of the battle came when the Rus' reserve force, which had been hidden and waiting, launched a surprise attack on Mamai's flank. The Mongol forces, caught off guard and disorganized by the unexpected assault, broke and fled the field. The defeat of Mamai at Kulikovo was a strategic and psychological triumph for the Rus. It proved that the Mongol army, long considered invincible, could be defeated by a unified force. The victory, while not ending the Mongol yoke, had immense long-term consequences. It cemented Moscow's leadership among the Rus' principalities and provided a powerful moral authority for its subsequent campaigns of consolidation and independence. Mamai's defeat, in turn, led to his assassination by his rival, Tokhtamysh, and the collapse of his political power. The Battle of Kulikovo was thus a critical step on the long road to Russian statehood and the eventual liberation from Mongol rule. The political chaos that followed the decline of the central authority of the Golden Horde is a period known in historical sources as the Great Troubles, in Russian Velikaya Zamjatnya. This era, lasting from the mid-14th to the early 15th centuries, was marked by the complete fragmentation of the Golden Horde into a collection of warring factions. The hereditary authority of the Khans, derived from their Chinggisid lineage, was rendered impotent, and the state's immense power was diffused among ambitious military commanders and powerful emirs, who became the de facto rulers. The Horde was no longer a single unified empire, but a tumultuous landscape of competing warlords, each vying for supremacy and control over the remnants of the once mighty state. This political instability was a direct result of several factors. The first was the rapid succession of weak and ineffectual Khans. Following the death of Janibeg in 1357, The throne of the Golden Horde changed hands over 25 times in a mere 20 years. Many of these Khans were puppet rulers, installed and deposed by powerful emirs who did not possess the royal Borjigin bloodline. This constant turnover in leadership created a power vacuum at the center of the state, which was quickly filled by those with the most military strength and political cunning. The second factor was the rise of these ambitious emirs and warlords. The most prominent of these figures was Mamai, a Beklebek, who was the true ruler of the western half of the Horde's territory for over 2 decades. Mamai, as a non-Chinggisid, could not become Khan himself, but he wielded immense power by installing his chosen puppets on the throne. His military campaigns and diplomatic negotiations were conducted in the name of his Khans, but the real authority was his. Another powerful figure who emerged during this period was Edigi, a Nogai emir who, in the early 15th century, would dominate the politics of the Horde's successor states. These warlords, who had amassed their own armies and controlled vast territories, effectively replaced the Khan as the central political authority. The third factor was the physical and economic destruction of the Horde's urban centers. The capital city of Sarai, a symbol of Mongol power and a hub of international trade, was repeatedly sacked and captured by these warring factions. This constant warfare crippled the city's economy, decimated its population, and destroyed its infrastructure. The trade routes that had once brought immense wealth to the Horde were now insecure and often closed, leading to a precipitous decline in state revenue. This economic collapse, in turn, made it even more difficult for the central authority to maintain control over its vast territories and military. The Great Troubles marked the definitive end of the unified Golden Horde. It was a period of self-inflicted chaos that systematically dismantled the political and economic foundations of the state. The power that was once concentrated in the hands of a single Khan was now dispersed among numerous warlords, who, in their ruthless competition for supremacy, created the fragmented political landscape from which the Horde's successor states would eventually emerge. By the late 15th century, the Golden Horde had fragmented into a collection of successor states, the most powerful of which was the Great Horde, led by Akhmat Khan. The Grand Principality of Moscow, under the rule of Ivan III, had systematically grown in power and wealth, positioning itself as the dominant force among the former Rus's principalities. This growing disparity in power led to a direct and final confrontation over the issue of tribute. For decades, Moscow had been increasingly defiant, intermittently refusing to pay the heavy annual tribute that was the foundation of the Mongol yoke. Akhmat Khan, seeing his authority and the very legacy of Mongol dominion threatened, assembled a large army with the intent to reimpose the subservience of the Ruses and restore the prestige of the Horde. Ivan III, a cautious and shrewd diplomat, was faced with a critical choice: to submit and pay the tribute, or to refuse and face the full military might of the Great Horde. He chose defiance. In 1480, Akhmat Khan's forces, having allied with the Grand Duchy of Lithuania, marched towards Moscow with a formidable army. Ivan III, in a display of political unity unprecedented in Russian history, rallied his boyars and military forces to meet the threat. The two armies converged on the Ugra River, a small tributary of the Oka River, which served as a natural defensive line for the Muscovite forces. What followed was not a bloody battle, but a prolonged and tense standoff known as the Great Stand on the Ugra River. For several weeks, the two armies faced each other across the river. Ivan III's forces, with a superior defensive position, held the north bank, while Akhmat Khan's army occupied the south. There were sporadic skirmishes and attempts by Akhmat's forces to cross the river, but none were successful. The Great Horde's army, composed primarily of light cavalry, was well suited for open field warfare, but lacked the siege engines and heavy infantry necessary for a decisive river crossing against a prepared opponent. The standoff was ultimately decided by a combination of strategic factors and a psychological war of attrition. Ahmad Khan had been expecting the arrival of his Lithuanian allies, but they never materialized. The harsh autumn weather and the lack of supplies for his large army began to take their toll. Ivan III, meanwhile, was content to maintain his superior defensive position, knowing that time was on his side. He had a secure supply line and a unified force, whereas Ahmad's army was becoming increasingly demoralized and hungry. Faced with an unyielding enemy and a collapsing logistical situation, Ahmad Khan made the fateful decision to retreat in November 1480. The retreat of Ahmad Khan's army, though a moment of mutual non-aggression, was a profound symbolic and political event. It was the last major Mongol incursion into Russia, and the failure of the Great Horde to reimpose its authority definitively signaled the end of the Mongol yoke. The Ruses had not only refused to pay the tribute, but had successfully defended their territory, proving that the Mongol threat was no longer insurmountable. The Great Stand on the Ugar River thus represents the final chapter of Mongol dominion over Russia, a quiet but decisive end to an era of submission and a powerful testament to the rise of a new independent state. The fragmentation of the Golden Horde and the decline of its central authority led directly to the emergence of a number of powerful successor states. Among the most significant of these was the Kazan Khanate, a state centered on the middle Volga River that played a critical role in the geopolitics of Eastern Europe for over a century. The Kazan Khanate was founded in the early 15th century, and its origins were a direct result of the political instability of the Great Horde. The state was established by a powerful faction of Mongol and Turkic nobles who had broken away from the central authority, creating a new, independent polity from the remnants of the Golden Horde and the ancient Bulgar civilization. The Kazan Khanate's cultural identity was a unique synthesis of Mongol, Turkic, and Islamic traditions. The state was founded on the ruins of the old Volga-Bulgar civilization, which had been a powerful, urbanized, and Islamic state before the Mongol invasion. The Mongol ruling class, a small minority, quickly assimilated into this larger Turkic and Islamic populace. The result was a new cultural and political entity that was distinct from its nomadic Mongol origins. The official language of the state was Tatar, a Turkic language, and its religion was Sunni Islam. The capital city of Kazan, situated on a high hill overlooking the Volga River, was a bustling center of commerce, diplomacy, and culture. The city's architecture reflected this synthesis, with mosques and madrasas built alongside traditional Turkic and Mongol fortifications. The military of the Kazan Khanate was a formidable force, feared by its neighbors, particularly the Grand Principality of Moscow. The army was a blend of heavy cavalry, light cavalry, and infantry, and it was a direct descendant of the Mongol war machine. The Kazan Tatars were renowned for their horsemanship, their skill with the composite bow, and their use of feigned retreats and other classic steppe tactics. Their military strength was a key factor in their ability to maintain their independence and to conduct a long and destructive series of raids against Russian territories. These raids, which often targeted the borders of the Grand Principality of Moscow, were a source of immense wealth for the Khanate, as they captured thousands of slaves and demanded ransom for their release. The long history of conflict with Moscow was a defining feature of the Kazan Khanate's existence. The two states were locked in a rivalry that was both political and economic. Moscow, under Ivan III and his successors, saw the Kazan Khanate as a primary obstacle to its territorial expansion and its claim to be the sole heir to the Rus lands. The Kazan Khanate, meanwhile, saw Moscow as a source of tribute and a constant threat to its trade routes and its independence. The conflict between the two states culminated in a series of wars that were fought with a ferocity that characterized the late medieval period. The Kazan Khanate, while often victorious in its early campaigns, was eventually defeated and conquered by Ivan the Terrible in 1552, a decisive event that marked the end of the Khanate and the consolidation of Russian power in the Volga region. The decline of the Golden Horde and the resulting political vacuum led to the emergence of the Crimean Khanate, a formidable power on the Black Sea coast that would play a significant role in the geopolitics of Eastern Europe for centuries. Its origins are directly linked to the internal strife of the Golden Horde and the ambitions of a powerful Mongol clan. The state was founded in the early 15th century by Hak-I-Giray, a descendant of Genghis Khan, who, with the backing of the Grand Duchy of Lithuania, successfully challenged the authority of the Great Horde and established his own independent state in the Crimean Peninsula. The Crimean Khanate's strategic location was its most significant asset. Situated on the north coast of the Black Sea, the peninsula controlled vital maritime trade routes and served as a powerful military and economic hub. The capital city of Bakhchizari and the major port of Kaffa, originally a Genoese trading colony, became centers of commerce, diplomacy, and culture. The Khanate's economy was a blend of settled agriculture, pastoralism, and a thriving trade network, but its most infamous and lucrative enterprise was the slave trade. The Crimean Tatars, renowned for their horsemanship, conducted a long and devastating series of raids into the territories of Russia, Poland, and Lithuania. These raids, known as the harvesting of the steppe, were a primary source of wealth for the Khanate, as they captured thousands of slaves who were then sold in the major slave markets of the Ottoman Empire. The Crimean Khanate's relationship with the Ottoman Empire was a crucial factor in its rise and enduring power. In 1475, the Ottomans, under Sultan Mehmed II, conquered the Genoese colonies in Crimea, including Kaffa. In a shrewd political move, the Crimean Khan, Menli I Giray, accepted Ottoman suzerainty and became a vassal of the Sultan. This alliance transformed the Crimean Khanate into a powerful instrument of Ottoman foreign policy. As an Ottoman vassal, the Khanate was granted autonomy in its internal affairs, but was expected to provide military support for the Sultan's campaigns. The Crimean Khan's army, a large and highly mobile cavalry force, became a key component of the Ottoman military, participating in numerous campaigns in Eastern and Central Europe. This alliance also provided the Crimean Khanate with a powerful protector, which gave it an immense advantage over its rivals. It was this relationship with the Ottoman Empire that allowed the Khanate to engage in a long and bitter rivalry with the Grand Principality of Moscow and its successors. The conflict was a direct extension of the centuries-old struggle between the sedentary agricultural civilizations of the Rus and the nomadic powers of the steppe. The Crimean Tatars, with the backing of the Ottoman Empire, conducted numerous devastating raids into Russian territories, hindering Moscow's territorial expansion and demanding tribute. This centuries-long rivalry would eventually culminate in the Russian Empire's conquest of the Crimean Peninsula in 1783, a decisive event that marked the end of the Khanate and its powerful position in the Black Sea region. The collapse of the Golden Horde and the resulting fragmentation of its territories led to the formation of numerous successor states, each with its own unique political and economic character. Among these was the Astrakhan Khanate, a sedentary state located at the mouth of the Volga River on the northern coast of the Caspian Sea. Its origins trace back to the mid-15th century when a faction of the Great Horde, breaking away from its central authority, established an independent state that would become known for its reliance on trade, its political fragility, and its eventual conquest by Moscow. The Astrakhan Khanate's strategic location at the mouth of the Volga River was its most significant asset. This position gave it a unique identity and a distinct economic foundation, as it controlled the vital trade routes that connected Central Asia and Persia with the Volga and, by extension, the Rus lands. The Khanate's capital, Astrakhan, was a bustling center of commerce where merchants from across Eurasia exchanged goods. The city was a major hub for the transit of silk, spices, and other luxury goods from the east, which were then traded for furs, timber, and grain from the north. The Khanate's economy was also heavily reliant on its position on the Caspian Sea, with fishing and salt production forming a significant part of its economic base. This sedentary trade-based economy was a notable departure from the nomadic, pastoral traditions of its Mongol forebears. Despite its economic prosperity, the Astrakhan Khanate was politically fragile. Its position at the crossroads of numerous competing powers made it a constant target for rival successor states of the Golden Horde, such as the Crimean Khanate and the Nogai Horde. The Khanate's political life was a turbulent affair, with a continuous series of succession crises and internal conflicts. The Khans were often puppets installed and deposed by the powerful warlords of the Nogai Horde, who exerted immense influence over the state's political affairs. This political instability was exacerbated by the growing power of the Muscovite state, which saw the Astrakhan Khanate as a key strategic target. The long history of conflict with Moscow was a defining feature of the Astrakhan Khanate's existence. Moscow, under Ivan III and his successors, had been steadily expanding its territories and consolidating its power, and it saw the Astrakhan Khanate as a primary obstacle to its control over the Volga River. The conflict between the two states was a political and economic struggle for control of the vital trade routes that flowed through the region. Moscow's ultimate objective was to gain direct access to the Caspian Sea and the lucrative trade with Persia and Central Asia. The conflict culminated in a decisive war in the mid-16th century. In 1556, Ivan the Terrible, having already conquered the Kazan Khanate, launched a full-scale invasion of the Astrakhan Khanate. The Muscovite army, utilizing a combination of heavy infantry, siege artillery, and riverboats, overwhelmed the Khanate's defenses. The city of Astrakhan was captured, and the Khanate was annexed into the Russian Empire. This decisive event marked the end of the Astrakhan Khanate and the beginning of Russian control over the entire Volga River, a strategic and economic victory that had immense consequences for the future of the Russian state. The fragmentation of the Golden Horde, while giving rise to powerful sedentary states like Kazan and Astrakhan, also allowed for the emergence of successor states that maintained a more traditional nomadic lifestyle. Among these was the Nogai Horde, a powerful confederation of Mongol and Turkic tribes that dominated the steppes east of the Volga River. Its origins trace back to the early 15th century and the political and military genius of the Emir Edigay, a powerful non-Chinggisid who had dominated the final decades of the unified horde. The Nogai Horde, a direct descendant of Edigay's political faction, would become known for its formidable cavalry forces, its shifting and pragmatic alliances, and its centuries-long struggle for survival against the growing power of the Russian Empire. The Nogai Horde's cultural identity was a direct continuation of the Golden Horde's nomadic traditions. The Nogais, a confederation of various Turkic and Mongol tribes, lived a pastoral lifestyle, their economy based on horse and cattle breeding. Their immense herds provided them with food, milk, and the raw materials for their clothing and yurts. This nomadic existence was a deliberate choice, a way of preserving the traditional steppe way of life that had been the foundation of the Mongol Empire. Their military was a direct reflection of this lifestyle. The Nogai cavalry, organized into a highly mobile and disciplined force, was one of the most feared military powers on the Eurasian steppe. The Nogais were masters of horse archery and the classic steppe tactics of feigned retreat and ambush. Their military strength was a key factor in their ability to maintain their independence and to exert influence over the more sedentary successor states of the Golden Horde. Despite its military prowess, the Nogai Horde was politically unstable. It was not a centralized state with a single ruler, but a collection of semi-independent tribes and clans, each with its own leader, or Mirza. This political fragmentation made it vulnerable to internal strife and succession crises. The Nogai Horde's history is a turbulent tapestry of shifting alliances, internal conflicts, and wars with its neighbours, particularly the Astrakhan and Crimean Khanates. The Nogais often acted as kingmakers, installing and deposing Khans in Astrakhan to suit their own political and economic interests. The Nogai Horde's relationship with the Grand Principality of Moscow was a complex one, a blend of conflict and pragmatic diplomacy. The Nogais, like the Crimeans, conducted devastating raids into Russian territories, a primary source of wealth through the capture of slaves and the demand for ransom. However, they also engaged in periods of peaceful trade and diplomatic alliances with Moscow, particularly when they were threatened by rival powers. The Nogai Horde's decline began in the late 16th and early 17th centuries, as the growing power of the Russian Empire and the westward expansion of the Kalmyks put immense pressure on its traditional territories. The Horde, weakened by internal conflicts and a series of famines, was slowly absorbed into the Russian Empire. The absorption was a gradual process, a combination of military conquest and political subjugation, which marked the final chapter of a nomadic way of life that had defined the eastern steppes for centuries. The decline and fragmentation of the Golden Horde, a process that had begun with the Great Troubles and was accelerated by the campaigns of Tamerlane, left the state a mere shadow of its former self. By the late 15th and early 16th centuries, the central authority of the Golden Horde, which had once ruled over a vast empire, was confined to the remnants of its traditional heartland on the lower Volga. The final decades of the Horde were a period of terminal decline, a struggle for survival against the rise of its own successor states and the inexorable expansion of the Grand Principality of Moscow. The final Khans of the Horde, who possessed the genealogical authority of Genghis Khan but little real power, were forced to navigate a treacherous political landscape of competing rivals. The end of the Golden Horde as a unified entity is often dated to the death of Akhmat Khan in 1481, which occurred shortly after the Great Stand on the Ugra River. Akhmat Khan's death triggered a civil war among his sons, which shattered the last semblance of central authority. The Golden Horde was now irreversibly divided into two primary factions: the Crimean Khanate, which was a powerful and independent state, and the Great Horde, a weakened remnant of the central authority. The Great Horde, led by Akhmat's descendants, was the nominal successor to the Golden Horde, but it lacked the military and political power to reimpose its will on its former subjects. The final Khans of the Great Horde, such as Sayyid Ahmad and Murtaza, ruled a state that was no longer an empire but a beleaguered political entity. Their reign was defined by a constant struggle for survival against their more powerful neighbours. The Crimean Khanate, a formidable power under the Giray dynasty and a vassal of the Ottoman Empire, was a primary antagonist. The Crimean Khans, seeing themselves as the true successors to the Golden Horde, actively sought to undermine the authority of the Great Horde and absorb its territories. This rivalry led to a series of military conflicts that further weakened the Great Horde and accelerated its decline. The Nogai Horde, a powerful nomadic group to the east, also exerted immense influence over the Great Horde, often acting as kingmakers and demanding tribute. The greatest threat to the Great Horde, however, was the ascendant power of the Grand Principality of Moscow. Ivan III, having effectively ended the Mongol yoke, now saw the remnants of the Horde not as a suzerain, but as a rival to be eliminated. Moscow skillfully exploited the internal divisions of the Horde and its rivalries with the Crimean Khanate, often entering into strategic alliances with the Crimean Khans against the Great Horde. The final destruction of the Great Horde was a direct result of one of these alliances. In 1502, the Crimean Khan Menyi I Girai, in a move to consolidate his own power and eliminate a rival, launched a full-scale invasion of the Great Horde's territory. His forces defeated the Great Horde's army and sacked its capital, Sarai. The Great Horde was formally dissolved, and its territories were divided among the Crimean and Nogai Khanates. The death of the Great Horde was a slow and protracted affair, not a single dramatic event. Its final years were a testament to the inexorable forces of political fragmentation and the rise of a new world order in Eastern Europe. The tradition of a unified Mongol empire was now over, and its legacy was to be found not in a single state, but in the complex tapestry of its successors. The decline and fragmentation of the Golden Horde had given rise to a collection of successor states, but their existence was ultimately a transitional phase in the geopolitical evolution of Eastern Europe. The power vacuum left by the Golden Horde was not destined to last. The expanding Russian Empire, which had emerged from the long period of Mongol suzerainty, was now a unified and formidable state with a clear objective: to consolidate its power and absorb its former rivals. This chapter chronicles the eventual conquest and absorption of the major successor states, the Kazan and Astrakhan Khanate process that marked the end of the Mongol era and the final consolidation of Muscovite power. The Kazan Khanate, located on the middle Volga River, was the first major successor state to fall. Its long and turbulent history of conflict with Moscow, punctuated by raids and shifting alliances, was a defining feature of its existence. However, by the mid-16th century, the balance of power had irrevocably shifted. Ivan IV, known as the Terrible, a ruler with a clear strategic vision and a powerful modern army, saw the Kazan Khanate as a primary obstacle to Russian control of the Volga. The conflict culminated in 1552 with the siege of Kazan. Ivan IV, utilizing a new professional army equipped with heavy siege artillery and firearms, laid a prolonged and determined siege to the city. The Kazan Tatars, who had a strong and well-fortified capital, resisted fiercely, but they were ultimately overwhelmed by the technological superiority and overwhelming numbers of the Russian army. The fall of Kazan in 1552 was a decisive event that marked the end of the Khanate and the beginning of Russian control over the middle Volga, a strategic and economic victory that had immense consequences for the future of the Russian state. The conquest of Kazan was quickly followed by the fall of the Astrakhan Khanate, located at the mouth of the Volga on the Caspian Sea. The Astrakhan Khanate, a sedentary state that was economically reliant on trade and fishing, was politically fragile and a constant target for its nomadic rivals. Ivan IV, having secured the middle Volga with the conquest of Kazan, now sought to gain complete control of the river and a direct route to the Caspian Sea and the lucrative trade with Persia. In 1556, a Russian army, utilizing a combination of ground forces and riverboats, launched a full-scale invasion of the Khanate. The Astrakhan Khanate, weakened by internal conflicts and unable to resist the overwhelming military superiority of the Russian army, was quickly conquered. The city of Astrakhan was captured, and the Khanate was annexed into the Russian Empire. This conquest secured Russian control over the entire Volga River, a strategic and economic victory that opened up new trade routes and allowed for the further expansion of the Russian state into the Caucasus and Central Asia. The fall of the Kazan and Astrakhan Khanates marked a profound turning point in Russian history. It was the definitive end of the Mongol era in the Volga region and the final consolidation of Russian power. The successor states of the Golden Horde, which had once been a source of immense power and wealth, were now a part of a new, unified and powerful empire. This period of conquest not only expanded Russian territory but also provided a new sense of national purpose and identity, as Russia cast itself not as a former vassal, but as the true heir to the vast lands of the Eurasian steppe. The decline and collapse of the Golden Horde and the subsequent conquest of its successor states did not bring an immediate end to the Mongol legacy. The Crimean Khanate, a formidable power on the Black Sea coast and a vassal of the Ottoman Empire, remained a significant and enduring threat to the expanding Russian state for centuries. Its history was a long and protracted struggle with Russia, a conflict defined by devastating raids, shifting alliances, and a final decisive annexation that marked the end of the Mongol era in the region. The Crimean Khanate's primary source of wealth and a major instrument of its foreign policy were the devastating raids conducted into Russian territories. These raids, known as the harvesting of the steppe, were not mere opportunistic attacks, but meticulously planned military expeditions. The Crimean Tatar cavalry, a highly mobile and disciplined force, would penetrate deep into Russian lands, bypassing fortified cities and targeting undefended villages and towns. Their primary objective was the capture of slaves, who were then sold in the major slave markets of the Ottoman Empire, particularly in Kaffa. The scale of these raids was immense. Historical sources indicate that thousands of Russian, Polish, and Lithuanian peasants and townspeople were captured and enslaved. This practice, which was a vital part of the Crimean Khanate's economy, was a constant source of terror for the Russian populace and a major obstacle to Russian colonization of the southern steppes. The long and protracted rivalry between the Crimean Khanate and the Russian Empire was a defining feature of the 16th, 17th, and 18th centuries. Russia, under its various Tsars and later emperors, was in a constant state of war or diplomatic tension with the Khanate. The conflict was a struggle for control of the vast and fertile southern steppes, a region that was vital for Russia's agricultural and territorial expansion. Russia's strategic objective was to secure its southern borders and gain a direct outlet to the Black Sea, which was a key objective of its foreign policy. The Crimean Khanate, meanwhile, with the backing of its powerful Ottoman suzerain, sought to maintain its independence and to hinder the expansion of its Russian rival. The conflict culminated in the late 18th century, under the reign of Catherine the Great. Russia, now a major European power with a modern army and a powerful navy, was determined to eliminate the Crimean threat once and for all. The Russo-Turkish War of 1768–1774 was a turning point. Russia's victory in the war forced the Ottoman Empire to recognize the independence of the Crimean Khanate, a move that effectively isolated the Khanate from its only powerful protector. The newly independent Crimean Khanate was then subjected to a series of Russian political and military pressures. In 1783, Catherine the Great, in a decisive and unilateral act, formally annexed the Crimean Peninsula into the Russian Empire. This event marked the end of the Crimean Khanate and the final chapter of Mongol rule in Eastern Europe. The long shadow of the Golden Horde, which had haunted Russia for centuries, was finally lifted, and Russia was now a major power in the Black Sea region. The history of the Golden Horde and its dominion over the Rus lands has been the subject of intense historiographical debate for centuries, particularly among Russian scholars. This debate has centered on two competing and often contradictory narratives. One that portrays the Mongol yoke as a period of brutal oppression that stunted Russian development, and another that views it as a transformative force that inadvertently laid the foundations for the centralized, autocratic state of Moscow. The traditional narrative, which was long dominant in Russian and Soviet historiography, views the Mongol yoke as a catastrophic event that had a profoundly negative impact on Russian civilization. Proponents of this view, such as the historian Nikolai Karamzin, emphasize the destructive campaigns, the immense tribute, and the constant threat of raids that characterize the period. They argue that Mongol rule isolated Russia from the cultural and political developments of Western Europe, particularly the Renaissance and the Reformation. This isolation, according to this narrative, led to a period of economic and cultural stagnation, as Russian society was forced to focus on a constant struggle for survival. The Mongol yoke is thus seen as a scourge, a foreign invasion that broke the continuity of Russian history and imposed a system of brutal despotism that was alien to the democratic traditions of the Kievan Rus. This view, which became a powerful component of Russian national identity, portrays the Mongol period as a dark age from which Russia was eventually liberated. A competing and more modern interpretation, however, views the Mongol yoke as a catalyst for the rise of Russia. Proponents of this view, such as the Eurasianist school of historians, argue that Mongol rule, while brutal, provided the Muscovite princes with the tools and the political model necessary to consolidate their power and build a centralized state. They point to the Mongol system of indirect rule, which, by entrusting the Rus princes with the collection of tribute, inadvertently provided them with the financial resources and the administrative experience needed to build a powerful state. The Mongols also provided Moscow with a powerful autocratic model of governance that was a departure from the more decentralized and democratic traditions of the Kievan Rus. This model, based on the absolute authority of the ruler and a centralized bureaucracy, was adopted and perfected by the Muscovite princes, who used it to systematically absorb their rivals and create a powerful, unified state. Furthermore, this narrative argues that the Mongol presence forced the Rus to look eastward, opening up new trade routes and cultural connections with the civilizations of Central Asia and the Islamic world. This cultural synthesis, which is evident in the art, language, and military practices of the Muscovite state, is seen as a unique and defining feature of Russian identity. The Mongol yoke, according to this interpretation, was a transformative period that, in its very brutality, created the conditions for the emergence of a new, powerful, and centralized Russian state. The historiographical debate over the legacy of the Golden Horde is thus a reflection of a deeper question about Russian identity. Was Russia a European power that was tragically separated from its destiny? Or was it a unique Eurasian civilization forged in the crucible of Mongol conquest? The historical facts, as always, allow for both interpretations, and the debate over whether the Golden Horde was a scourge or a catalyst continues to shape our understanding of Russian history. The lasting political impact of the Golden Horde on the development of the Russian state is a subject of significant historical inquiry. While the Mongol yoke was eventually overthrown, its influence on the Muscovite Tsardom's administrative techniques, legal principles, and autocratic model of governance is a central theme in this period. The Muscovite princes, in their centuries-long struggle for power, did not simply endure Mongol rule. They learned from it and, in many cases, adopted and perfected its methods. The political system that emerged in Russia was thus not a pure continuation of Kievan traditions, but a unique synthesis of Slavic customs and Mongol political innovations. The most profound influence was the adoption of a highly centralized, autocratic model of governance. The Kievan Rus had been a politically fragmented state, a collection of semi-independent principalities with a more decentralized feudal system. The Mongols, however, ruled through a system based on the absolute and unchallenged authority of the Khan. This model, which was based on the principles of the Great Yasa, was a departure from the more democratic traditions of the Rus assemblies, or Veshe. The Muscovite princes, in their rise to power, saw the effectiveness of this system. They adopted the Mongol model of an all-powerful autocratic ruler, a concept that would become the foundation of the Tsardom. The Russian word for money dengi is a direct loan from the Mongol tenge, a testament to this financial and political inheritance. The Tsars of Moscow, from Ivan III to Ivan the Terrible, utilized a system of state power that was based on the absolute loyalty of their subjects, a model that was a clear departure from the more consultative monarchies of Western Europe. The Mongol system of indirect rule also provided the Muscovite princes with invaluable administrative experience. By making the princes responsible for the collection of the Mongol tribute, or yasak, the Mongols inadvertently trained them in the skills of taxation, administration, and bureaucracy. The Muscovite princes, particularly Ivan I Kalita, became masters of this system, using their position to accumulate wealth and consolidate power. This experience in tax collection and administration, which was a central feature of the Mongol yoke, became the foundation for the Muscovite Tsardom's own centralized bureaucracy. The Mongol institution of the yam, or postal relay system, was also adopted by the Russians, a crucial administrative tool that allowed for rapid communication across a vast territory. The political language of the Muscovite court also reflected a Mongol inheritance. The Russian words for state treasurer, kaznache, and police chief, oprichnik, are of Turkic origin, a linguistic legacy of the administrative systems that were developed under the Mongol yoke. This linguistic and cultural synthesis was not merely incidental, it was a reflection of a deeper political transformation. The Muscovite princes, in their efforts to consolidate their power and assert their independence, consciously adopted the titles, symbols, and administrative methods of their former suzerains. The two-headed eagle, the symbol of the Byzantine Empire, was adopted by Ivan III, a deliberate move to position himself as the heir to the Christian Empire of the East. However, the political model that he adopted, the autocratic, centralized state, was a clear and lasting legacy of his Mongol predecessors. The economic consequences of the Golden Horde's rule over the Rus lands were profound and enduring, shaping Russian economic practices for centuries to come. While the Mongol system of taxation was a source of immense wealth for the Horde, it also had the unintended consequence of inadvertently training the Muscovite princes in the skills of centralized finance and administration. This Mongol economic legacy, a blend of destructive tribute and pragmatic trade policies, was a crucial factor in the rise of a new, powerful Russian state. The most visible economic consequence of Mongol rule was the imposition of the yasak, or tribute. This was a heavy annual tax levied on the Rus population, primarily paid in silver, furs, and other valuable goods. The Rus princes were made responsible for its collection, and any failure to meet the required amount resulted in brutal punitive expeditions. This system, while financially draining for the Rus populace, had a significant impact on the development of Muscovite economic practices. The Muscovite princes, particularly Ivan I Kalita, became masters of this system, using their position as the primary tax collectors for the Horde to accumulate vast wealth. They were known to collect more tribute than was required, keeping the surplus for themselves. This allowed them to consolidate their power, buy land, and fund their military, all under the guise of loyalty to the Khan. This experience in centralized tax collection and administration, which was a core feature of the Mongol yoke, became the foundation for the Muscovite Tsardom's own fiscal bureaucracy. The Mongols also had a lasting impact on the flow of commerce through the Eurasian steppe. The Pax Mongolica had facilitated an unprecedented era of trade, and the Golden Horde's territories became a crucial link in the Silk Road. The Rus lands, which had been relatively isolated from this global network, were now integrated into it. The Mongol rulers, in their pragmatic quest for wealth, provided a degree of security for merchants and trade caravans that was unprecedented in the region. This led to a revival of trade between Russia and the East, with Russian merchants exchanging furs and other goods for the silks, spices, and luxury items of Central Asia and Persia. This commerce, while controlled and taxed by the Horde, provided the Muscovite princes and merchants with new sources of wealth and a greater understanding of international trade. The economic legacy of the Golden Horde was thus a complex one. The Mongol system of tribute was a source of immense hardship and suffering for the Rus populace, but it also provided the Muscovite princes with the financial and administrative tools necessary to build a powerful state. The Mongol trade policies, while ultimately self-serving, integrated Russia into a global network of commerce and culture, which helped to fuel its own economic development. The political language and institutions of the Muscovite court, as evidenced by the word for money dengi, which is a direct loan from the Mongol tenge, were a clear and lasting legacy of this economic inheritance. The Tsardom's centralized fiscal system, its control over trade routes, and its immense wealth were all, in part, a product of its long and brutal period of Mongol suzerainty. The long period of Mongol suzerainty over the Rus lands resulted in a fascinating and enduring cultural exchange between the nomadic Mongol rulers and their sedentary Slavic subjects. This cultural synthesis was not a simple or one-sided affair. It was a complex process of adaptation and assimilation that left a lasting mark on Russian language, customs, art, and military practices. While the Ruses maintained their Orthodox Christian faith and their Slavic identity, they also absorbed numerous cultural elements from the peoples of the Golden Horde, a legacy that can still be found in modern Russian culture. The most visible cultural influence was in the Russian language. While Russian remained a Slavic language, it borrowed numerous words from the Turkic and Mongol languages of the Horde. These loan words were particularly prominent in the realms of finance, administration, and military affairs. For example, the Russian word for customs, tamorzhnya, is derived from the Mongol word for a seal, tamga, a symbol of the official authority of the Khan. The word for money, dengi, is a direct loan from the Mongol tenge. These linguistic borrowings are a clear testament to the administrative and economic systems that were imposed on the Rus by the Golden Horde. The word for jail, kazamat, and for a military detachment, ataman, are also of Turkic origin, a legacy of the military and political structures of the Mongol yoke. The culinary landscape of Russia was also subtly influenced by the peoples of the steppe. The introduction of foods and cooking techniques from the nomadic world, such as the use of yogurt, kefir, and various forms of preserved meats, became a part of the Russian diet. The widespread use of dumplings, such as pelmeni, and the practice of making stuffed pastries can be traced back to the culinary traditions of the Turkic peoples of the steppe. The use of fermented mare's milk, or kumis, as a drink, while not adopted by the general populace, was known to the Russian elite and was a cultural import from the nomadic world. The military practices and customs of the Rus princes and their armies were also transformed by their long contact with the Golden Horde. The Rus princes, who were vassals of the Khan and often fought in his campaigns, adopted many of the military tactics and equipment of the Mongol army. The use of light cavalry, the practice of feigned retreats, and the adoption of the composite bow were all military innovations that were learned from the Mongols. The Russian military, which had traditionally been based on a heavy infantry model, became a more mobile and flexible force, a direct result of its long contact with the nomadic peoples of the steppe. The use of elaborate military standards, banners, and the practice of having a strong military reserve were all practices that were adopted from the Mongol army. The cultural legacy of the Golden Horde was thus a complex one. The Mongol yoke was a period of immense hardship and brutality, but it also resulted in a profound and lasting cultural synthesis. The Rus people, in their struggle for survival, absorbed numerous cultural elements from their nomadic rulers, a legacy that can still be found in the language, customs, art, and military practices of modern Russia. This cultural exchange, a fusion of the steppe and the forest, was a defining feature of Russian history and a testament to the enduring power of cultural contact. The long period of Mongol dominion over the Rus lands had a profound and lasting demographic and genealogical impact on Russian society. The Mongol conquest and subsequent administration did not merely impose a political system. It created new social and genetic connections that were forged through a complex process of military service, intermarriage, and assimilation. The resulting demographic shifts and the integration of Tatar noble families into the Russian aristocracy are a key component of this period, a legacy that can still be seen in the genealogies of many of Russia's most prominent families. The initial Mongol conquest led to significant population displacement and a loss of life, but in the subsequent centuries of the Mongol yoke, a new demographic reality emerged. The Mongol rulers, a small minority, were absorbed into the larger Turkic and Slavic populations. This process was accelerated by the Mongol policy of integrating conquered peoples into their military and administration. Turkic and Mongol warriors who served the Khan were often granted land and titles, and they settled in the conquered territories. Over time, these families intermarried with the local populace, leading to a profound genetic and cultural synthesis. The Rus chroniclers of the time noted the presence of many individuals of Tatar origin in the Muscovite military and court, a testament to the assimilation of the nomadic elite. The most significant genealogical legacy of this period was the integration of Tatar noble families into the Russian aristocracy. As the Golden Horde began to fragment and its central authority declined, many Tatar nobles, seeing an opportunity for political and social advancement, defected to the Muscovite court. These Tatar families, who often came with their own military retinues and administrative expertise, were welcomed by the Rus' princes. They were granted lands and titles in exchange for military service and loyalty, a policy that significantly strengthened the Muscovite military and administrative bureaucracy. This influx of Tatar nobility was not a passive process. These families actively sought to assimilate into Russian society, converting to Orthodox Christianity and adopting Russian names. However, they retained a strong sense of their own genealogical heritage. This assimilation of Tatar nobility was so widespread that by the 16th century, a significant number of Russia's most prominent boyar families, including the Godunovs, Yusupovs, and Khans of Sibir, had genealogical roots in the Golden Horde. The demographic shifts of the Mongol yoke were not limited to the nobility. The constant raids and military campaigns led to a large-scale population displacement, particularly from the southern steppes to the more protected northern forests. This migration, a key factor in the rise of Moscow, led to a repopulation of the northern territories and a consolidation of the Slavic population. The Mongol period also saw the settlement of Turkic peoples in the Rus lands, particularly in the border regions, which created a diverse and multi-ethnic population. The genealogical and demographic legacy of the Golden Horde was thus a complex tapestry of conquest, intermarriage, and assimilation. It was a period that, in its brutality, created new social connections and a demographic reality that would define the Russian state for centuries to come. The linguistic legacy of the Golden Horde is a clear and enduring testament to the long period of Mongol suzerainty over the Rus' lands. While Russian maintained its core Slavic identity, it was profoundly influenced by the Turkic and Mongol languages of the nomadic peoples who dominated the steppes. This linguistic synthesis was not a dramatic, overnight transformation, but a gradual process of adaptation and assimilation. The numerous loanwords that entered the Russian language were particularly prominent in the realms of finance, administration, military affairs, and daily life, a direct reflection of the political and social structures imposed by the Golden Horde. The Mongol system of governance and tribute collection was a primary conduit for this linguistic exchange. The Russian word for money dengi, is a direct loan from the Turkic tenge, a term that was used for the Horde's currency. This linguistic borrowing is a clear testament to the fiscal system that was imposed on the Rusas and the immense economic power that the Mongols wielded. Similarly, the Russian word for customs, tamozhnya, is derived from the Mongol word for a seal, tamga, a symbol of the Khan's official authority. This term, which was used for the official seal that was placed on goods and documents, became a part of the Russian bureaucratic lexicon. The word for treasury, kazna, is also of Turkic origin, a legacy of the centralized fiscal administration that was developed under the Mongol yoke. The military and administrative structures of the Golden Horde also left a lasting mark on the Russian language. The word for a military detachment or unit, ataman, which is still used in Russian today, is of Turkic origin. The word for a watch, or a patrol, karol, is also a loan from the Turkic languages of the steppe. The word for a jail, kazamat, and for a tax, yasak, which was the term for the heavy tribute that was levied on the Rus's populace, are also of Turkic origin. These linguistic borrowings are a clear reflection of the Mongol military and administrative systems that were imposed on the Ruses and the constant threat of punitive raids that characterized the period. The culinary landscape of Russia was also subtly influenced by the languages of the steppe. The word for a variety of traditional Russian dumplings, pelmeni, is derived from the Turkic pelmen, a type of filled pastry that was a staple of the nomadic diet. The word for a type of horse-drawn carriage, kibitka, is also of Turkic origin, a legacy of the nomadic lifestyle of the peoples of the Golden Horde. The word for tea, chai, which is a staple of Russian culture, is of Mongol and Chinese origin, a testament to the trade routes that were opened up by the Mongol Empire. The linguistic legacy of the Golden Horde was a complex and enduring one. The numerous loanwords that entered the Russian language were not just a reflection of foreign influence. They were a testament to a profound cultural synthesis. The Rus people, in their struggle for survival, adopted the language of their rulers, a legacy that can still be found in the Russian language today. This linguistic inheritance, a fusion of the steppe and the forest, was a defining feature of Russian history and a powerful testament to the enduring impact of the Mongol yoke. The decline of the Golden Horde and the subsequent fragmentation of its vast territories coincided with the dramatic expansion of a new Turkic-Islamic power, the Ottoman Empire. This period was not just a simple exchange of one power for another. It was a profound geopolitical shift that saw a transition from a Mongol-dominated Eurasian steppe to a Turkic-Islamic sphere of influence that would dominate Eastern Europe and the Mediterranean for centuries. The Ottoman Empire, which had emerged as a minor state in Anatolia, was now a major military and political force, and it would systematically absorb the territories and successor states of the Golden Horde into its own imperial system. The most crucial link in this transition was the Crimean Khanate, a successor state of the Golden Horde that became a powerful vassal of the Ottoman Empire. The Duray dynasty, which ruled the Crimean Khanate, was a direct descendant of Genghis Khan, which gave the Ottoman Sultan a symbolic link to the Mongol legacy. The alliance, forged in 1475, was a pragmatic and strategic partnership. For the Ottomans, the Crimean Khanate provided a powerful and mobile cavalry force that was a key component of their military. The Crimean Tatars, renowned for their horsemanship and their military prowess, participated in numerous Ottoman campaigns in Eastern and Central Europe, a fact that had a profound impact on the military history of the region. The Crimean Khanate's role as an Ottoman vassal also had immense political and economic consequences. As a protected state, the Khanate was able to maintain its independence from its rivals, particularly the Muscovite state, which was a constant threat. The Khanate's economy, which was heavily reliant on the slave trade and raids into Russian territories, was a primary source of wealth for the Ottoman Empire. The slaves and the immense tribute that the Khanate extracted from its Ruses and Polish rivals flowed into the Ottoman treasury, funding its imperial expansion. The Crimean port of Kaffa, a former Genoese colony that was now under Ottoman control, became a major slave market and a key hub for trade between the Black Sea and the Mediterranean. The Ottoman Empire, in its expansion, systematically absorbed the other successor states of the Golden Horde, such as the Kazan and Astrakhan Khanates, through a combination of military conquest and political subjugation. The fall of these states to the expanding Russian Empire created a new geopolitical reality, one in which the Ottoman Empire and its Crimean vassal were now in direct and often violent conflict with a new and powerful rival. The long, protracted struggle between the Ottoman Empire and Russia for control of the Black Sea and the southern steppes was a direct legacy of the Mongol era. The decline of the Golden Horde was a profound and lasting geopolitical shift. The Mongol legacy, which had once been a source of immense power and political unity, was now diffused among its successor states. The Ottoman Empire, a new and powerful Turkic-Islamic state, was now the dominant force in the region, and it would systematically absorb the territories and peoples of the former Golden Horde into its own imperial system. The Crimean Khanate, a crucial link in this transition, was a powerful and enduring testament to this geopolitical shift, a legacy that would haunt Russian history for centuries. The long period of political fragmentation and decline of the Golden Horde, a process accelerated by the collapse of its central authority, created a vast and lawless frontier in the southern steppes. In this tumultuous borderland between the collapsing Mongol successor states and the expanding Russian and Polish-Lithuanian empires, a new and unique people emerged: the Cossacks. The Cossacks were not a single ethnic group, but a diverse and self-governing community of military frontiersmen whose identity was forged in the crucible of this geopolitical vacuum. Their history is a testament to the complex and enduring legacy of the Golden Horde, a period that, in its chaos, created the conditions for the rise of a new and powerful force. The origins of the Cossacks are a subject of historical debate, but their name itself, from the Turkic word Kazak, meaning freeman or adventurer, is a clear linguistic legacy of the steppe. The Cossacks were, in their earliest form, a mix of runaway peasants, serfs, and adventurers who had fled the strict social and legal structures of the expanding sedentary states. They were drawn to the lawless frontier of the southern steppes, where they adopted the nomadic lifestyle, military traditions, and a form of social organization that was a blend of Slavic, Turkic, and Mongol influences. Their communities, which were centered on fortified camps, or sietches, were based on a democratic and egalitarian system, a stark contrast to the autocratic monarchies they had fled. The Cossacks' military traditions were a direct inheritance from the peoples of the steppe. They were renowned for their horsemanship, their skill with the composite bow, and their use of light cavalry tactics. Their military campaigns, which were often a mix of raids, plunder, and military service, were a testament to their skill and their adaptability. The Cossacks were a powerful and flexible military force that was equally at home on the open steppe or in the fortified cities of their rivals. Their military service was a key factor in their survival. They often served as mercenaries, fighting for both the Khans and the Tsars, a pragmatic and strategic decision that allowed them to maintain their independence and to acquire wealth and status. The Cossacks' relationship with the Khans and the Tsars was a complex one, a blend of conflict, diplomacy, and mercenary service. The Cossacks often served as a buffer state, a powerful military force that could be used by both the Khans and the Tsars to project their power in the southern steppes. They often allied with the Crimean Khanate against the Muscovite state, participating in the devastating raids on Russian territories. However, they also served in the Russian army, fighting against the Crimean Tatars and their Ottoman suzerains. This dual loyalty was a key factor in their survival, as it allowed them to play a role in the geopolitics of the region, often acting as a powerful and independent military force that was a challenge to all sides. The Cossacks, a new people of the steppe, were a powerful and enduring legacy of the Golden Horde, a testament to the profound cultural and social transformations that were set in motion by the chaos of its decline. The collapse of the Golden Horde and the subsequent fragmentation of its territories did not entirely extinguish the nomadic way of life on the Eurasian steppe. The final chapter of this long tradition was written by the Kalmyks, the last major nomadic group to migrate from Central Asia into the former domains of the Golden Horde. The Kalmyks, a Western Mongol Oirat people, embarked on a great westward migration in the early 17th century, a movement that would bring them into the Volga River region and into a complex relationship with the expanding Russian Empire. Their story is a testament to the enduring power of nomadic traditions and a poignant epilogue to the centuries of Mongol dominion. The Kalmyks' migration was driven by a combination of political conflict and economic necessity in their Central Asian homeland. They were a powerful and disciplined military force, known for their horsemanship and their skill as archers, traditions that were a direct inheritance from the Mongol Empire. Their arrival in the Volga region in the 1630s had a profound and immediate impact on the geopolitics of the region. The Kalmyks quickly established their dominance over the Nogai Horde, a nomadic successor state of the Golden Horde that had previously ruled the steppes east of the Volga. The Nogais, who were weakened by internal conflicts and a series of famines, were unable to resist the Kalmyk advance and were either absorbed into the Kalmyk Khanate or forced to flee westward. The Kalmyks' relationship with the expanding Russian Empire was a complex one, a blend of military service, diplomatic agreements, and periods of open conflict. The Russian Tsardom, which was in a constant state of war with the Crimean Khanate and the Ottoman Empire, saw the Kalmyks as a valuable ally. The Kalmyk Khan, in a series of diplomatic agreements with Moscow, was granted the title of Khan and a degree of autonomy in exchange for providing military service to the Russian army. The Kalmyk cavalry, a powerful and highly mobile force, became a key component of the Russian military, participating in numerous campaigns against the Crimean Tatars and their Ottoman suzerains. This alliance, while pragmatic and mutually beneficial, was also a source of tension, as the Kalmyks, who were a nomadic people, often came into conflict with the settled Russian and Cossack populations over grazing lands and resources. The Kalmyk Khanate, which was a successor state in the truest sense of the word, was the final embodiment of the nomadic way of life that had defined the Eurasian steppe for millennia. Its military traditions, its political structures, and its social customs were a direct continuation of the Mongol Empire. However, the Khanate's existence was ultimately a transitional phase. The expanding Russian Empire, which was now a powerful and centralized state, was a relentless force that would eventually absorb the nomadic traditions of the steppe into its own imperial system. The Kalmyk Khanate, weakened by internal conflicts and a series of migrations back to Central Asia, was eventually annexed by the Russian Empire in the late 18th century, a decisive event that marked the final chapter of a nomadic way of life that had defined the region for centuries. The Golden Horde, a powerful and influential state that dominated the Eurasian steppe for centuries, has a legacy that extends far beyond its physical collapse. Its history, a complex tapestry of conquest, cultural synthesis, and political evolution, continues to influence national identities, historical memory, and geopolitical relationships in Russia, Ukraine, Central Asia, and the Caucasus. The echoes of the Horde are not just a matter of academic interest. They are a living part of the political and cultural landscape of the modern world. In Russia, the legacy of the Golden Horde is a central and often controversial part of the national identity. The historical memory of the Mongol yoke has been a powerful force in shaping Russian self-perception, often portrayed as a period of national humiliation and foreign oppression that was eventually overcome by the strength and unity of the Russian people. This narrative, which has been a key component of Russian national historiography since the 19th century, has been used to justify the centralization of power, the suppression of internal dissent, and the expansion of the Russian state as a force for national liberation. However, a competing and more modern interpretation, particularly among Eurasianist historians, views the Mongol period as a formative period in Russian history. This narrative emphasizes the cultural and political synthesis that occurred under Mongol rule, arguing that the centralized autocratic state of Moscow was a direct inheritance from the Golden Horde. This debate over the nature of the Mongol legacy continues to be a central theme in Russian political and cultural discourse. In Ukraine, the historical memory of the Golden Horde is a complex and often painful one. The southern steppes of Ukraine were a primary target of the Mongol invasions and a major source of slaves for the Crimean Khanate. The history of this period is a central component of Ukrainian national identity, often portrayed as a period of foreign oppression and national tragedy. The Cossacks, who emerged in the borderlands between the collapsing horde and the expanding Polish and Russian states, are a central figure in this narrative, often portrayed as the first defenders of Ukrainian independence and a symbol of national resilience. The historical memory of the Crimean Khanate and its devastating raids on Ukrainian territories is a key component of this narrative, a source of historical memory and a powerful symbol of the long struggle for national survival. In Central Asia and the Caucasus, the legacy of the Golden Horde is a more direct and often more positive one. The successor states of the Golden Horde, such as the Kazan, Astrakhan, and Crimean Khanates, are seen as the historical foundation of the modern nation-states of the region. The Turkic and Mongol peoples of Central Asia, who were a key component of the Golden Horde, see this period as a formative period of their own national history. The legacy of the Horde's cultural synthesis, its unique blend of Turkic, Mongol, and Islamic traditions, is a central theme in the national identities of these nations. The historical memory of the Horde's military prowess, its sophisticated political and economic systems, and its role as a major power in Eurasia is a source of national pride and a key component of their national identity. The echoes of the Golden Horde are thus not just a matter of historical fact. They are a living part of the political and cultural landscape of the modern world, a testament to the enduring power of a state that, though long gone, continues to shape the destiny of the nations that were once its subjects. The long and turbulent history of the Golden Horde, a civilization that arose from the most unlikely origins, was a story of a stunning zenith of power and prosperity, followed by a long and painful twilight of decline and fragmentation. The Horde's existence, a testament to the military and political genius of the Mongol peoples, was ultimately a transitional phase in the geopolitical evolution of Eastern Europe. Its decline, a complex and multifaceted process, was driven by a combination of internal strife and external pressures, which left behind a complex and enduring legacy in the heart of Eurasia. The zenith of the Golden Horde's power, a period that was marked by the reign of Uzbek Khan, was a time of unprecedented prosperity and stability. The Khanate, which had been transformed from a nomadic military power to a sophisticated urban civilization, was a major force in the political and economic life of Eurasia. Its capital, Sarai, was a magnificent city, a cosmopolitan center of commerce, diplomacy, and culture. The Horde's military, a formidable and disciplined force, was a key component of the Ottoman and Mamluk armies, and its power was a constant threat to the expanding sedentary states of Eastern Europe. This period of power and prosperity, however, was a fleeting one. The twilight of the Golden Horde began with the death of Uzbek Khan and the onset of a prolonged period of succession crises and internal strife. The political chaos that followed, a period known as the Great Troubles, left the state a mere shadow of its former self. The hereditary authority of the Khans, which had once been a source of immense power, was rendered impotent, and the state's immense power was diffused among a collection of warring emirs and warlords. This internal strife, which was exacerbated by the devastating effects of the Black Death and the destructive campaigns of Tamerlane, crippled the Horde's military and economic foundations. The capital, Sarai, was sacked and razed, its population decimated, and its trade routes, which had once brought immense wealth to the Horde, were now insecure and often closed. The decline of the Golden Horde was also driven by the inexorable expansion of its rivals. The Grand Principality of Moscow, which had been a vassal of the Horde for centuries, had, through a shrewd policy of collaboration and consolidation, emerged as a powerful and unified state. The Great Stand on the Ugar River, a moment of mutual non-aggression, was a profound symbolic and political event that signaled the end of Mongol dominion over Russia. The rise of the Ottoman Empire, a new Turkic-Islamic power, and its alliance with the Crimean Khanate, a successor state of the Golden Horde, was a further blow to the Horde's power and a profound geopolitical shift that would define the political landscape of Eastern Europe for centuries to come. The fragmentation of the Golden Horde into a series of smaller kingdoms, the Kazan, Astrakhan, and Crimean Khanate, was the final chapter of its political existence. These successor states, which were a direct legacy of the Horde, were eventually conquered and absorbed by the expanding Russian and Ottoman empires. The long and painful twilight of the Golden Horde was thus a period of political fragmentation, internal strife, and a struggle for survival against the rise of new and powerful rivals. The Horde, a civilization that had once dominated the Eurasian steppe, was now gone, but its legacia complex tapestry of conquest, cultural synthesis, and political evolution would continue to shape the destiny of the nations that were once its subjects.